2023 to order. I will notice that we have public access to meeting both in person and we are streaming live on web for those who cannot be with us this evening. And you also can access that meeting, of course, anytime afterwards on our website. If I could have Carlin do the roll call and verification of quorum.
Mr. Ebel.
Here.
Ms. Bushman.
Here.
Mr. Pope.
Here.
Ms. Portson. Ms. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Robbie.
Present.
Ms. Erler.
Here.
And Ms. Rano is excused for the meeting.
And if I could just note, if one of the board members out there in the audience can make sure to wave at me if Barb wants to talk, because I
Here?
well, yeah, she's back here. So otherwise, because I won't be seeing
Sure.
her. All right, if we could stand for the pledge, please. We will move into the public comments section of our meeting. No one has signed up to speak this evening. Is there anyone here in attendance who would like to speak to the board with respect to an agenda item? No one has indicated. So we will move into item 5, which are our presentations, and we will start with our Student Senate rep, Adeline Johnson.
All right. So for starters, Student Senate sold over 600 tickets for Winter Formal, which took place on February 18th. And that's almost double the amount of tickets we sold last year, so that's really exciting. Senate put in a lot of effort into advertising this event, and we introduced new activities and decorations that we plan to carry over into the following years. SPASH NHS ran a children's book drive throughout the month of February and donated the materials to local daycares. Over 100 slightly used or new books were donated. On February 21st, SPASH Forensics performed at the annual sub-district tournament. All members of the team scored high enough to advance to the district tournament, which will take place at SPASH on March 14th. So congratulations to members of SPASH Forensics. On Saturday, March 4th, the SPASH music students performed the district solo and ensemble at Marshfield High School. There were a total of 86 events performed between band, choir, and orchestra students. And of these events, 31 will be advancing to state, so that's really exciting as well. 10 SPASH students made it on the Wall of Fame for exceptional performances, so huge congratulations to all performers. Monday, March 6th marked the beginning of the SPASH track and field season. Good luck to our SPASH track and field athletes for this upcoming season. On March 7th, all juniors took part in the ACT exam. Congratulations to juniors for taking this important step towards future education and career readiness. This concludes the SPASH Student Senate update. Thank you.
Do board members have any questions? I guess just on behalf of the board, I'd like to extend a thank you also to Student Senate for the partnership for the League of Women with the League of Women Voters and the Portage County Business Council. They were involved in our forums. The SPASH students took a look at putting some questions together for it, as well as collecting questions during the forums that were held this past week. I think this is the second year that
I know they did it last year for sure. I don't know.
that partnership has happened. So it was a really good event, and it was great to have. There were a number of students there, and it's so nice to see you being there, taking a look at who's running for the school board and who's running for. It was Village Plover that night, and so anyway, again, thanks to you and your colleagues for making sure we're involved.
And I would agree with Meg and thank the Student Senate. I got to listen to some of the questions that they gave to Katrina Shanklin when she was here, and I was so impressed. They turned in those questions, and they were really relevant. And I think Katrina had answers for all of them, but how impressive to hear what you brought forward to her as far as what's going on in society and legislature. So kudos to you. Very, very proud of the students that did that.
All right, thank you. We'll move into the communication report. Sarah O'Donnell.
Hello. The communications dashboard is included in your packet this evening. Just a few things to note on traditional media. We saw a very high AVE and reach. We had 2 pieces get picked up by MSN, which really jumped those numbers, which is great. Most notably, one that Sherry Stanchik was interviewed for, helping families know if the 5 signs for their students to be ready for kindergarten. So really glad to have that exposure and see her level of expertise shared on that level. Facebook, we saw a slight decline in impressions, but we maintained our engagement levels, so really happy to see that. Instagram, we saw nice increases for both impressions and engagement of 13 and 35%. A few things going on in our world. The Education Enrichment Fund is now open, so anyone interested in those mini grants up to $5,000 for innovative classroom projects that are not able to be funded through the regular budget are encouraged to apply. That will remain open through April 14th, and applications are available on our website. School perception survey will be coming out here in early April. Surveys have been finalized, and those will be deployed April 3rd through the 17th. So we'll start to send some pre-emails letting folks know that those are coming, and then obviously encouraging everyone to complete those. Enrollment campaigns are also well underway. 4K is now currently open. That opened a little bit ago. We're seeing very nice numbers, right, kind of in speaking to Sherry, where we would expect those to be right now for enrollment. But obviously anyone with students of that age are encouraged to apply now. Summer school registration will open coming back from spring break. And then PODS is also currently open, and we're in the middle of running a campaign in conjunction with Fidelis, hoping to increase the number of subs we have in that substitute pool, and that's going very well. Other than that, yeah.
Quick question. Are impressions the same as views?
Yeah, impressions are how many times individuals have seen that. So a view could be like, I could see it 3 times. We're not going to count that 3 times. An impression is we're going to count it once per person. Yep. Good question.
Do board members have any other questions of Sarah?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will move into our superintendent's report. Corey.
Okay. Congratulations to SPASH. They won the Region 2 Spirit of Excellence Award, which honors students for achieving excellence in leadership, sportsmanship, and service. So great job, Student Senate and the faculty advisors at SPASH. Our food service department recently has won a few awards. They won the Turn Up the Beat, B-E-E-T. What that is for, it's a USDA recognition that congratulates them on the summer meal programs that they offer. So they have to be nutritious, they have to be appealing. So we were excited to be the only school district in the state of Wisconsin to win that award.
Really?
Yep, so that's awesome. And then PJ Jacobs and SPASH did a promotion for their food service program in February, and really focused on the breakfast program and the importance of breakfast. And both SPASH and PJs won an award for that promotion. So congratulations to our food service team. They're doing a phenomenal job across the district. Spring break is March 20th through the 24th next week. We have a school board election on April 4th. We have Alex Summers, G. Pope, Miguel Campos, Bob Larson, Chris Scott, and Ted Kowalski running for the election on the 4th. We have 2 board meetings in April, April 10th, and then just a reminder, we've got the 24th, which will do the interviews for the open board seat that we're going to appoint that evening, and then we'll do our reorg meeting that same night. Couple other things, Washington Elementary School was recently selected to receive a water bottle filling station through Delta Dental. There was a grant, and they submitted that grant, so they're receiving that. And then thank you to Jen, Meg, G, and Chris. They did a tour last week of Point Precision. What an eye-opening experience that was, and what an opportunity for our students to be able to go in places like Point Precision and have the ability to work on some pretty incredible things that aerospace things that go on, Boeing engines, the Black Hawk helicopter, medical devices. They take a lot of our students through the apprenticeship program and then hire them. So thanks to Point Precision as well as other local businesses for that. And then last, we're doing a tour of Auto Select tomorrow at 1:30. So I just wanted to remind board members about that tour tomorrow. That's it.
Do board members have any questions of Corey?
I had a question about the interviews. Do we have a list of questions? Are we drawing that up, or are you going to do that, or what?
We have a list of questions that we've used in the past. What I think we're going to do, G, is bring that process and that information to the board at the first meeting in April to make a decision for that second meeting in April.
So we'll get to see the questions before.
So, yeah, the board, so we'll have the whole process for the board, both kind of how we proceeded in the past, whether the board wants to continue with that process. And then we will be making that decision at that first April board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Did we determine a time? A start time?
I don't know that we've determined a start time.
We have not yet. We can do that at that meeting
We'll do
as well.
that at that meeting as
We
well.
talked about starting early, though.
Yes, we
Yes.
did.
5 o'clock, I think, was what we talked about.
Because well, and again, by then, we'll have a better sense of how many
April.
applicants we have, which is really gonna,
Determine start.
it'll help us
Right.
make some wise choices about how long that interview process is gonna last. All right, we will move into item D, which is the WASB School Board Annual Development Tools Survey and Analysis Review, and I'm gonna turn that over to Corey.
Sure. So I'm going to introduce Cheryl Stinsky.
Yep,
I
just
said
like
that
it
right.
was.
She is a search and governance consultant with WASB. She's been great to work with. I've had a couple opportunities to meet with her via phone and via WebEx to plan for tonight. She is going to give us just a very, very brief overview tonight because this is the first time that the board has had an opportunity to see this information. Generally, she spends like up to 2.5 hours or more with boards. So we'll just do a brief summary tonight, and then if the board wants her to come back at a later date or at a retreat, we can definitely do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Great, thank you very much. I'm not used to having my back to people when I present, so I apologize, but I guess I have to face this way. So are you going to pull up the PowerPoint for me?
I can do that.
Okay, great.
Oh, are you trying, Carolyn?
I was trying.
Well, while you're doing that, I will introduce myself just a little bit more. Again, my name is Cheryl Stinsky. I'm a consultant with WASB, and I have been with them for over 12 years. And my background is in mediation and communication and conflict resolution, primarily doing training and mediation and facilitation and coaching around the issues of communication and leadership and conflict resolution. So I'm happy to be here with you tonight, and thank you for inviting me here. And thrilled that you're doing this annual board development tool. So thank you for all that you do for kids. That's amazing when you think about all the time and energy and care that you put into not just education, but into kids. And I was listening to some of that tonight, so thank you up front for that. Can I make this go now with this? Yeah, great. Okay, so as Corey said, it's going to be a brief presentation because I know you have a whole lot on your agenda. And so I actually told Carlin that after a half an hour, if I'm not almost done, to kind of give me the slice around the neck, that'll tell me that we need to be almost done. But what I want to do tonight is, first of all, review the survey strength and opportunities for growth, and then highlight any areas that may assist your board in developing as a high-functioning team, and then finally plant some seeds for your district to plan some follow-up leadership development activities. Whether that's with me or you decide to do it on your own, there's so much more that you can do with this information. So I want to set the context for this before we get into the actual survey. And so this gives you some information from some surveys that were done, or some research that was done actually, in effective school boards and whether they have any bearing on student achievement. And this lists several different researches that have been done, and they all point to the fact that effective school boards do have a lot of bearing on student achievement. And so if you look at some of the characteristics, it's committing to a high vision of expectations for student achievement. So there's that commitment up front, having strong shared beliefs about what values and how you should be effectively teaching all children. Being accountability driven, and accountability is one area of the survey that we'll talk about a little bit tonight. Being data savvy, using data to make decisions, aligning your resources to meet district goals. We always say that your budget should fit your strategic plan, right? You can't have a strategic plan and not budget for things because it's impossible to make that happen. And then being collaborative of each other, of your superintendent, working collaboratively with your families and your district, taking part in things like this, development and training, and then leading as a united team with the superintendent. So those are the characteristics that put what your survey was into context. We talk a lot about governance around those characteristics because it is governance what you're in charge of, right? The school board's in charge of governance. And so really what that amounts to is setting the direction first, providing the structure for that to work, and then finally having accountability measures in place so that you are making sure that the direction and the structure are doing what you intended to do. And part of that is the moral imperative, which I can't get into because we don't have time tonight, but basically your moral imperative is what directs your vision. It's why are we here, but even more, what's the basic thing that we have to do? And so a moral imperative can be all children can learn, no exceptions. And that may be your vision as well, or it may provide a focus for your vision, and which then gives you strategic direction. So finally, in talking about governance, we talk about a governance mindset and how important that is. And really, it keeps the board's focus on all children learning and being safe, first of all. It keeps your focus on watching the budget. Not determining the budget necessarily, because you have your superintendent, your finance people to help you do that, but keeping an eye on that budget and making sure that your budget does fit your strategic plan. Keeping focused on the goals and on the strategic plan, and building that infrastructure that you need to have for strong governance, holding the organization, the school district, your superintendent accountable to the community, because the community are the ones that have asked you to do this, and then keeping your community informed. So that's what a governance mindset entails. So with that in mind, this is what I plan to do tonight, is really looking first at the strengths and opportunities from the annual survey, and then highlighting some common themes, needs, areas for continuous improvement. And then at the very end, I have some suggestions for what you might want to do going forward. I think this is a really good quote. This is not an evaluation, but a planning tool. And if you look at this, the idea is to expose the board to a wide array of school board responsibilities, taking this tool. It also gives you an idea of where do you need some more conversation. And sometimes that isn't real obvious until you begin to have a conversation about some of the things that the survey tells you. Identifying areas where there are strengths and opportunities, and then helping to build trust and credibility with your community. And this quote comes from Crucial Learning, and I think this is so important to remember. Surveys and evaluations aren't designed to define us, but to refine us. So sometimes people think that this is to tell you what you're doing wrong, and I would say, first of all, it's important to see what you're doing right, and then work on where there are some gaps or some opportunities. So this graph gives you an idea of your overall scores from the survey. And it has it laid out in the different areas that you were surveyed in: board operations, planning, vision, policy, budgeting, culture, community engagement, district operations, and then data-driven decision-making. And you'll see you have different scores in all of them. This is just the overall. It gives us a picture of your alignment overall, and what areas you overall think that you are stronger in, and what areas you may need some additional work on. On the other hand, it doesn't give you a big picture. I mean, it gives you probably 100,000 foot level, but it doesn't give you the whole picture. And so what I'm going to do is actually break this down into each area, and then we'll take a look at what that picture looks like. And you'll notice on your sheets that some things are underlined in black. They may also be highlighted, and they may also not have anything but the black underline. So the black underline shows general alignment of the board. So that means that you were, everybody responded either that you were doing very well, that this was almost taken care of, that you were working on it, or that it was at least started. If it's green highlighted, whether it's underlined or not, it shows that your board shows up stronger than the state average of all the boards that have completed this survey. So it shows your alignment is stronger than the average. And if it's red highlighted, whether it's underlined or not, it shows that there's improvement or clarification needed. That means that it showed up below the state average. And I can tell you that on most of these, if you were below the state average, it wasn't a lot below. But we tend to look at some of those red lines and think, oh my God, we're all in red. That means we're really bad. Please don't take it that way. That's why we want to go through these individually. So if we look at vision, you'll see that the first three are both underlined and in green. And that means that you all felt you were in alignment, meaning that you had at least started these areas. You have a process that allows key stakeholders to help refine your vision and strategic priorities. You clearly communicate that vision to staff, parents, and community, and you have clear strategies to accomplish your vision. You agreed that that was at least in the making, and in fact, if you look at and we're not going to do that as closely tonight because of time, but if you look at the report that you received, it shows you just how much in alignment you were. In other words, how many people said that we're at the top of this, how many people said that we're in the middle, and how many people said we're at least starting on this. And then the last one shows that you were aligned on that. So in other words, you were all in those three categories, but it was below the state average. And why that can be important is it can help us see that we can do better because other boards have done better on this. And so it's a way of looking at, is this an area that's really important to us? Do we need to do that much better in this area? And if so, is that an area we want to focus on? If anyone has questions, you can ask them as we go. I'm just trying to pick that up. But so then the next one is policy. And you'll see that the first four of those, or the first three, are both aligned and underlined, meaning, again, that's an area where you're in a lot of agreement and you're also above the state average. If you look at the next one, this is why it's important to look at each of these and look at them more closely, because you're above the state average, but you're not in alignment on that. In fact, in that we have appropriate interventions, 2 people were not sure about it. And not that we haven't started it or we're not sure. And so it's important that you allow for some conversation about that. If it's just one person, then typically we figure that person may be the one that needs to be looking for more information. And that can often be true with a new board member. When you haven't gone through the whole cycle, you may not realize that that's something that we do in August, or that's something that we do in March, and we haven't gotten to that yet. So, but when there's more than one person, then we have to consider that perhaps there needs to be some conversation so that those people who are saying, we haven't started this, or I'm not sure if we've started this yet, really know what's going on. Because some people said, we're almost there. And so when there's that much of a gap there, it helps us realize that we need to at least have a conversation about that. Then if you look at the next four, they're all underlined, which again means that you're in agreement for the most part, or in alignment about those. But they're all below state average. Again, meaning that there could be room for improvement if you see these as areas that would be helpful to you. And these are all about policies. So basically looking at, like, we regularly review our policies to ensure there are no barriers to equitable education for all students. That may be something that as a board you decide we need to do more work on that, or we need to have more conversation on that. So that may be something you want to focus on as a goal even. Or you may look at those things and say, we're all in alignment on them. We know we're not where we want to be, but we have other priorities right now. So it just helps you to prioritize that as you go through this. Then we look at data-driven decision-making. And the first three of those are underlined and green, so you're in alignment as a board, and you're reported above the state average. In other words, your alignment is greater than many other boards is. And then if you look at the fourth one, you're above the average, but not in alignment again. So these are the kinds of things that then you want to take a second look at, perhaps. We have a schedule and protocol to review data and program performance. So that may be sometimes an easy goal, to understand perhaps that there needs to be a different process in place, or we need to do the process a little differently, or it could even be that people aren't understanding the process that is in place. So, but just to give you an opportunity to look at that more. The last two you'll see are not highlighted at all. And if you look at the survey, you'll see that neither one of those are compared in the state average. I'm not sure if that's because other boards didn't use those questions or why that is, but you're in alignment on them, which is, again, a really important part, that people are seeing that you examine data and that you have a process to ensure all students can participate in advanced coursework, the arts, and extracurricular programs. So in those areas, again, we can't measure that according to other boards, but you measured it against each other, meaning that you're in alignment on that. Budgeting. The first two in alignment again, and above the state average, which usually tells us that that's not an area we need to put a lot of attention into. The third one is another one of those that is not measured against other boards, and so that's why it's not highlighted either way, but you're in alignment on that one too. And then the fourth one on there is one that you were in alignment on but was below the state average again. And that doesn't mean it's something you need to focus on. It just means that you might want to take a second look at that. And then the last one, this one was not only not in alignment, it was below state average. And one of the things that I want to point out is that in the fact that it wasn't in alignment, there were 2 people who said that it was not achieved or started, and 3 people were not sure. So not only was it not in alignment, there's a big gap because 3 people thought it was fully achieved and 2 thought it was mostly achieved. So when 3 people aren't sure and 2 people think, or 3 people thinks it's fully achieved, we've got a gap in there that needs to be addressed. And so even though it may not look like it's an issue, I would say this is an area that you really want to focus on at some point in time in the future, so that you have a way of filling that gap and recognizing maybe it's part of your community survey that's coming up or something that addresses that as well, and it may be taking a look at that. Then in planning, this was an area too where there wasn't as much alignment, even though you were ahead of the state average. And so it was the 2 processes for annual reviews that people were not in the same place with. But again, you were above state average. So it may be that people just don't quite understand the processes that are in place. When we do this, we don't, when we gather the information and make the report, it's not by who filled it out, right? So it's just taking that aggregate information. And then the second part of that is you're in alignment with the third one. Sound risk management practices, but that was below state average. So you can see why it's important to take a look further at some of these things, because if we only looked at, oh, we're in alignment, or we only looked at this is above state average, we might miss some important areas that we want to spend some time on. And then the last one, where you're not in alignment and you also are below the state average, is we have explored sharing services with other districts and or our local municipalities. Now I'm having trouble talking. And that's one, again, that is something that could become a goal for the board for a year. And so looking at how we might make that happen can be a board goal for the year. And then district operations. This one, the first 2, there was great alignment. We have initiatives in place to facilitate leadership succession in key administrative positions, and we regularly communicate our academic priorities and achievement results to the parents and public, in alignment above the state average. And then we had the next one that was not only not in alignment, it was not it was below the state average, and that staff authority and responsibility is well defined and granted at appropriate level. And so it may be that a discussion needs to happen about levels of authority and who's responsible for what. Sometimes on boards that can be confusing, because they don't know all that goes on within the district and don't understand all the levels of authority. So that can be an exercise in and of itself. And then we have a process to gather feedback. That one, again, was not compared to other boards, but you are not in alignment on that, on the process to gather feedback from teachers and other staff about updating the employee handbook. So that may be something that, again, needs some discussion. Not all of these would have to become goals by any means. Sometimes it's just a discussion at a board meeting, so that people are brought up to date on what is going on. Sometimes it's a presentation from the superintendent, helping you understand the processes that are in place that people may not even be aware of. Community engagement is a big one. In fact, it takes 2 slides. And so this one, you're in alignment and above average on your board is represented at district and community events when possible. And I heard you talking about some of those things actually before we started. And then we regularly communicate our financial needs to the public in an easy to understand format. And sometimes that's the challenging part about it when we talk about that, is the easy to understand format. But those 2 you are in alignment with. And then the third one, we ensure our standards are consistent with parent and community expectations. You're in alignment with that, but again, below the state average on that. So not that, again, that needs a great look because you're in alignment with it, but you might want to have some discussion again at a board meeting. And then our board is addressing the needs of all students to ensure high levels of learning and is addressing students' interests through extracurricular program and other activities. You're in alignment on that, and that was not compared to other boards. The second part of community engagement, you have 2 of those on the top above state average, but the first one you're not in alignment on. We regularly communicate with our legislators on a specific or a particular subject or bill. In fact, on that one, you had 5 said you were fully or partially achieved, 4 said you were not achieved or not started, and 1 said not sure. So again, there's one with that big gap that may need some conversation, may need to look at doing a board goal on that, but it's something that there was that gap in people. And when some people think we're doing really good at this and others are thinking we're not, that's when the conversation needs to happen. Because it could be that people are in the dark about things, or it could be that people aren't recognizing how important something is that you're not doing. This next one is about legislative advocacy processes to monitor issues and communicate our position to our legislators in the WASB. That one, you're above state average and you're in alignment that you have that process. The next one, regularly discussing legislative issues during board meetings. You're not in alignment and you're above or below the state average. So that's something, again, that may need some discussion. That's an area that we at WSB think is really important. You are the advocates to your legislators, right, for public education, and they look to you for that. And so it's important that you are abreast of what's going on and that you are working with each other on that. The next one, we invite legislators to our schools. That one, you're in agreement on or in alignment on that's something that you're focused on and you're above the state average on that. Same is true with partnerships with business. And we heard about some of that tonight, which is awesome. That's what a lot of schools are finding great success with, is some of those partnerships. The second part of that, I thought there was a second slide. Just wait. Okay, never mind. The next one is board operations. And here you're in alignment on the first 3 and you're above the state average on those. There was a little bit of, I think, in the we honor our decisions outside of the board meeting. That wasn't as high as some of the other alignments that you have. And so I didn't interpret that to mean that there were any problems with it. It's just something that someone is not as sure about as others. Our board meetings are effective and efficient, that you're in alignment on, and that you evaluate the superintendent at least annually with clear goals and performance criteria. So those 3, again, above state average and not seeing any issues there. Where you were in alignment and yet not up to the state averages was that board members speak on behalf of the board or district only when authorized and clearly identify when they are commenting strictly as an individual. In many boards that I've worked with, the second part of that is where the problem has come in, is that they're not clearly identifying when they are commenting strictly as an individual. So being on the board doesn't take away your ability to speak on things, but it is important that people know that you are speaking as an individual and not as a board member. Because truth be told, you wear your board hat 24/7, right? You go in the grocery store, people think you're a board member if they know you're a board member, and they want to talk to you about it. I've had board members say that my husband or my wife know that we don't do pillow talk around the board issues. That's how seriously they take that. So knowing that when people look at you and you make comments about things that they may be just assuming that you're speaking for the board, is important to pay attention to. And then that open meetings law, that you have a good understanding of the open meetings law. Again, that didn't show up as a problem in your alignment, but it does show that there may be a look at that because it's not up to the state average of what boards are reporting. Then culture is the next one. And
I think we skipped a slide.
oh, go ahead. What was that?
Oh, did we skip a board operations slide?
Yeah.
Oh,
there's
did
two
we?
of them.
Sorry. This one. You're right. Thank you very much. So this one, all of these, you are not up to the state average. However, if you look at the first four, you're in alignment with each other on those. You encourage constructive and professional discussions at board meetings. Our board committees are used effectively. I prepare for the board meeting by reading the board packet, and the members of the board come to meetings prepared. Interestingly, and not just your board, almost every board I've worked with says, I come to the board meetings prepared. I prepare for the board meetings. Almost every board does not give as high of a rating to the rest of the board comes prepared to the board meeting, which I always think is just very interesting. In this case, one person answered to the question, the members of the board come to meetings prepared, not sure. And I think that could easily be a comment that you're not sure about, right? Always, that other people are as prepared. You wouldn't know if they've read their board packet unless they start asking questions that would have been answered in the board packet, right? So then the last two, we have an effective orientation process for new board members. That was an area that people were concerned about. And so I think that's something you may want to look at, and I'll mention that again later. And then we conduct an annual school board self-evaluation. Well, given that this is your first WASB school perceptions one, I'm not sure what you've done in the past. I think that's something that hopefully you will continue doing. Some boards actually do them twice a year, and then review that to see what progress they've made. Most boards, however, do them annually, and then look at the results of that. And then the last is culture, and in this one, you're above the average in one and below the average in the other. So let's take a look at those. We work with the superintendent in a spirit of mutual respect, open communication, trust, and confidence. That's a really important one. And in fact, over the past year, I've worked with several boards where that was not the case, and they're struggling. Because, in fact, one of your board members asked me ahead of time, we were talking about where I live, and there's a board in that area. He said, yeah, they tried to ditch their superintendent. And there was a lot of controversy around that, which took a lot of energy from that board and a lot of energy from the superintendent. And so having that is really important and helpful for both of you, for the board and for the superintendent, to be able to have that spirit of mutual respect and trust. Then our board models mutual respect and professional behavior is something that you see, you're in alignment with that. It's just not above the state average. It's below the state average, which doesn't, again, mean that it's a problem, but it may be something in looking at the rest of these that you want to pay a little attention to. Our culture promotes high expectation. Again, you're in alignment, but not, it's below the state average. The rest of them, you're not, well, I'm not seeing my underlines. Now I see them all. You've got alignment with all of them. They're just below the state average. And so if you look at them, they kind of go together, some of them. Like we value differences of opinion and do not let them degenerate into personality conflicts. Certainly goes along with mutual respect and professional behavior. We focus on strategic decisions and policy issues rather than administration of day-to-day things. Typically, when you have a good working relationship with your superintendent, you're not trying to do her job. You're doing your job, which is policy, and letting her do her job, which is carrying out that policy. And then our community believes that the district is effectively governed and makes decisions with the best interests of students in mind was one that you were in alignment, but a little bit lower in alignment on that. And sometimes that's a matter of communicating to your community rather than it is what you're doing. And so taking a look at that, why that looks like that is really important. And your community survey may, again, shed some light on some of that for you. So that's what I'm doing. I'm hitting this too hard. I'm going to do this reflection question in a little bit later. So first of all, I just wanted to share your mission and your vision, which I'm sure you all know, but I think it's an important context for looking at what do we do with this. And so what if more than merely recognizing the democratic principles underlying governance, local school boards could become an example of highly effective decision-making, leadership, and action? And when we say become an example, that kind of goes back to what your community thinks, right? If they're not seeing that, then maybe there's some things that you could do to help them see what you really are doing. So in thinking about that, I talked about this as we went through. It may be helpful to determine some priority areas for you to work on and think about making some leadership goals that you would have for the board for the next year or so. And this is just a sample of what one board did. As a board, we will strive to fulfill our role as leaders and champions of public education and educating all students, and I put in the Stevens Point Area School District, by improving our ability to govern with excellence through, and this is where you'd put in what your strategic goals are. So again, here's your overall view of things. And if you look at what do we do with that, your areas of consideration, this was a process that we have used with other districts where you actually look at all of the areas that you want to consider, and some of that may be through reflection after reading the survey results, the report in more thoroughly. But what I did was pull out some of those that were not aligned and were not were below the state average and put them on here. So your board operations was one area, particularly the board orientation process, and then whether or not you're going to continue to do an annual board self-evaluation. The next one was board culture, and some of that was around board norms. I'm not sure if you have an actual board norms that you've adopted. Sometimes people just have it in their policy. But the process of looking at your board norms, especially if you have new board members, which I know you're going to have coming up, can be very helpful in putting alignment in place with that. Planning was really focused on that sharing of services with other entities, and then community engagement was an area where it was having some communication plan around financial stewardship and then legislative action plan. So those are the things that I pulled out. That doesn't mean that you would say those are the things we absolutely want to focus on. But if you do some kind of a process in order to get at that, that would be helpful. And so I've concluded with sample format governance goal, which you also have as a handout, that you may put it in a goal like this. You may have your own format that you do your governance goals in, and that's fine. I just pulled one that we've used, that Campbellsport used, and found very effective for them. So it's just a blank slate for you to look at. And then finally, I just want to share a few of the ways that WSB can assist your board with some of this. You're having me here tonight. That's one way. There can be consultants can help you facilitate other board discussions around this, around other things that may come out of this, providing some training in data and database decision making, those kinds of things. Staff counsel can help you with some of the legalities and how to do board meetings better, around open board meetings and whether or not what you do with closed session and looking at some of that. They can help with the assistance and employee handbooks. And then the government relations staff is there to help you connect to your legislatures. And so one thing I want to point out about that is I'm sure you're all getting the weekly updates from them on legislative things. And so it makes it pretty easy to just pay attention at least to what's going on. And so thinking about even pulling some of that and discussing that at a board meeting or at least reporting on it might be helpful. So that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you again for all that you do for students, for public education, for your community, and recognize that you all bring the passion to the table and the drive and the commitment. And without you, some of that wouldn't happen. So pat yourselves on the back. I think the survey results were real positive, and there's some opportunities in them as well. So thank you for having me here tonight. And one thing that's in your handouts that I would encourage you to give to Corey is the exit ticket. And that asks you to share something you learned tonight that was helpful to you. It asks you what's something that you still have questions or wonder about. And the third one, any other thoughts regarding next steps that you would like the board and leadership team to consider. So thank you very much, and I'll let you get on with the rest of your board.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
So do board members, I guess before you leave, do board members have any questions from Cheryl about the process or about the report or anything at this point?
Yes.
Just one clarifying question. So when we see things in red and they're underlined, I heard you say maybe not something you need to look at because you're in alignment, but under the state average.
Yes. So what School Perceptions does is compares you to the rest of the state average. So you can take a look at, okay, we think we're doing really well on this, but perhaps we could do better. And so if you look at that and it's something that this board thinks is really important, you might consider taking a second look at that. One other thing I forgot to mention, but I do want to point out, is if you do this again next year, then you have longitudinal data. You could get compared against yourselves, which is really, really helpful.
So in your expertise, you would advise that we potentially double click on the reds that aren't underlined because we're below the state average and not in alignment.
And not in alignment.
Okay.
Those are the things that I'd start with.
Okay.
To focus on those first.
Thank you.
Yes.
How many schools are in the, when we're determining below or above the average, how many schools?
That's a good question. I can't give you an answer for, but I can find out for you and get that to Corey, and she can share that with you. I know that not all of the districts are doing the survey. Some of them have been doing them from day one, and others, like you, are just starting to do them. So I don't know what the number is, but I'll find out and get that information to you.
Thank you.
Hey, any other questions? Hey, great.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
I guess I'm confused a little bit. So if there's an item that we all say that we are not real good at, and that's an important item, I would think that would rise to the top as opposed to an item that some of us think we're pretty good at and some of us don't, because that's a communication issue perhaps. But in reality, if you have an item that you have consensus of that we're low on, that to me would be a goal.
It could be, but I think it may not be just a communication gap. It may be when you have some highs and some real lows, that may also be more telling than anything, because it's not just a communication gap perhaps. Perhaps it's really a gap in what what your values are or what you think it should look like, or
Back to the values at the beginning. I just didn't want the board to feel that when we get together and we talk about these, that those items that we are in consensus of that we're low, that is a lower priority, because I don't agree
Right.
with that.
Right. that's-
Right, I agree. And that's why it's important to take a look at it and
Yeah.
not just pull out the numbers. And, yeah,
Thank you.
great, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all?
Of Cheryl or just?
Cheryl.
In general, okay.
Yeah. Right. So,
Have a good
does
trip
the
home.
board do we want to talk about this? Again, this is the first time that we've all seen the results. We had Cheryl here to present. The thought was that we would take some time to distill what the conversation was today, maybe take a look at some of this, and then, we're in a situation clearly where we will definitely have different board members in the not too distant future. And so, we do have the opportunity to begin to discuss this substantively next month, or to look to set aside, some significant time this summer with a board retreat for us as a board to focus on this with the 9 people that will be moving forward next year,
And
as board members.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to fill out that exit slip. That will help then determine how much time and how we want to work with this information that we just learned of tonight.
Go ahead, Gene.
You mentioned it before. To me, this screams as a topic for a retreat, because there's so much information here,
Right.
and how you would structure the retreat. There's only one thing I think that's time sensitive on this, and that's the orientation for new board members, because we're gonna have 2 new board members.
I can speak to that. Carlin and I are in the process of enhancing our board orientation, and we have pulled a ton of information from the WASB website. So I've got a timeline laid out pre-election, immediately after the election, and then throughout the entire year, which also includes a recommendation to have new board members have a board mentor, that they have someone that they can potentially connect with if they have questions or concerns. So that's being looked at, and we'll continue to enhance it as we need to. I did sit down with both Dennis and Jen on Friday and asked, as the 2 newest board members, how they felt the orientation went and what we did really well that we have to make sure that we keep, and what are some opportunities for growth with that. So that's being looked at.
I felt good that was up there, knowing that Corey is doing that work actively right now, ready for the next set of new board members.
Dennis?
I concur that this summer would be a good time to do it. I have concerns about and I know it's a broken record, but I don't want to feel rushed through any kind of a board retreat. And I think that a lot of things we can do this summer that are really important, but I think we have to talk significantly upon what that looks like, how many days we're looking at, because doing all this in the afternoon, then I felt rushed last time, where it's like, I'm not sure how much we accomplished because we tried to put so much into a short period of time. So I think this is worthwhile. I think this item on the board retreat is worthwhile, but we have other activities which are worthwhile, and I don't want to have it become so compressed that we get out there and wonder where we're coming or going.
Sure.
One other thing, did you see the most recent thing from WASB is they're having a get-together of all new board members? Somewhere, I can't remember where.
Yeah.
That's actually in my materials. It's linked in. There's
There's-
dates across the state.
And there's a whole slew of new board member webinars.
Yep.
And Dennis and I attended one in person together when we.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. This- I also wanted to say there is some timely stuff in here as it pertains to budgeting, given that we're working on the budget evaluation tool. I think I would appreciate if we could have some conversation on the agenda in the next meeting before we get to the retreat. I think as the current board that answered the survey, it'd be important to have that feedback walking into, even with a new board, right? Because that board will not have experienced anything in the survey.
Well, so why don't we then, as Corey noted, why don't we all take a little bit of time to fill out the tickets, get them back to Corey, and then we'll see what we can pull together, the common themes that people are thinking they'd like us to be taking a look at.
What is the
At the
ticket?
April meeting.
It's on page 17, or slide 7.
The packet.
Corey, maybe you could
presentations.
pull from the feedback, the things that are time relevant, and so that we're talking about those, but not necessarily everything again in that
Right.
particular board meeting.
Here's your priority,
Gee, it looks like this.
and then,
It's just a single sheet of paper.
Oh, all right,
Yeah.
sorry, it was under something else, thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts?
Nope.
All right, we will move then into our consent agenda, and that includes the minutes of the prior school board meeting of February 13th, 2023, approval of the schedule of monthly bills and employment recommendations.
Move for approval?
Second.
Motion by Chris, second by Jen. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Hearing none, I will have Carlin call the roll due to the monthly bills.
Ms. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Ebel,
Yes.
Mr. Pope,
Yes.
Ms. Portson. Yes. Ms. Bushman,
Yes.
Mr. Robbie,
Yep.
Ms. Erler,
Yes,
motion carries.
thank you. We will move into item 7, business services, and I will turn that over to our interim chair, Jeff Ebel.
Thank you. So we met last Monday for our meeting, and it was the first meeting that I chaired as the chair of that committee. Mike Wade was chairing the rest of the year, or earlier this year, and he had to resign. He's moved to Detroit Lakes, I think, Minnesota. So I was voluntold to fill out his term for the rest of the year. So we had one action item on the agenda that night, and that was for the approval of the bills for the month, and that to be sent to the board here for action tonight, which we already took. There were also a number of items that were information only that took up most of the meeting. And I think one of those items we actually did touch on, the item B under business services here, the resolution authorizing the transfer of funds. We did talk about that. We did not vote on it because we're going to be handling that tonight. So Dr. Owens, would you care to speak to us about item B in the agenda here?
Good evening. Yes, we speak a little bit about defeasance. In October, we carried out a flat levy that allowed us to raise some additional funds to put towards defeasance. And we mentioned at that time that at this time of year, we would come back to you with a resolution to complete the defeasance process. With me is Mr. Eric Cass, who is the Director of Public Finance for PMA Securities, our financial advisor who put this together. He will explain to you what defeasance means and answer any of your questions that you have about the process. I think it's good to know that we mentioned we were looking forward to about $1,944,000 in savings to taxpayers over several years, and we came in a little bit higher, $1,970,000 and some change. So that was a good thing. But I'm going to turn it over to Eric and allow him to say a few words.
Thank you and good evening. Nice introduction. Eric Cass, Director of Public Finance from PMA Securities. Here this evening to talk a little bit about this piece of paper that everybody should at least have a copy of. As Dr. Owens alluded to, last fall the board approved a final levy, and included in that levy was an additional about $3.7 million, and that was targeted at keeping your levy flat. So under Wisconsin state law, you can levy additional in what's called Fund 39, which is to repay referendum debt. Now, before we get into this analysis, it's important to understand there's 3 options available to a school board that you can look at for these additional dollars. Number 1 is to prepay debt. Well, we're going to point out here in a moment that none of your debt is callable, so that is not an option that you have in front of you this evening. But in the future, if this were to continue, and you may do this again in the future, you don't know, or a future board may, you would have that opportunity when those call dates are in front of you. The second option is a defeasance, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And the third one is to do nothing, and it can just sit in general fund balance. You could look at investing it and getting some more interest, but it doesn't necessarily put that money to work and returning it to the taxpayers like a defeasance or a prepayment would. So the recommendation this evening is to go through a defeasance transaction. If you can start on the far left, there's a gray box that says before defeasance. So before any action would be taken, this is what your current debt profile or debt schedule looks like for your referendum approved debt. There's 2 issues outstanding, one from April of 2019 and one for October 13th of 2020. Each of those issues is organized in a fashion that you can see what the principal is each calendar year, the interest rate associated with that principal, or what we call a maturity, and then the interest owed for all the outstanding maturities is that third column, and that's the same for both of those outstanding issues. One last thing you'll notice, because I talked about prepayment, is there's a call date at the bottom. So your April of 2019 debt is callable on April 1st, 2027, and the second issue from October of 2020 is callable on April 1st of 2029. So still a little bit out into the future in order to do that.
Could you say what callable means again?
Sure. A callable feature, which is those green boxes, I guess I should have said that as well. It allows the school board at that point in time to pay off that existing debt without any penalty, but it's also more commonly used to refinance or lower the interest exposure. So when there's higher interest rates that you're paying and there's lower interest in the marketplace, you can access that when a call feature is put in place at that point in time to lower your interest rate exposure. So those are the 2 common strategies behind having a call date.
Thank you.
Good question. So each of those have different callable debt, again, highlighted in green. 2 things that we look at when we look at the best use of funds, and in your case, the $3.7 million. Number 1 is what is going to create the maximum amount of savings. And that's really revolving around your longest maturity and the highest interest associated with that maturity. But if you look at your debt schedule, there's a little bit of an intersection there where your longest maturity is at 2%. And that's why if you transition to the right, you're going to see when we're looking at paying off debt, we're actually not targeting what we normally would, which is your longest maturity all the way up to 2040, because that interest component is different at 2% versus 3.5%. So going to the far right under the blue, you can see that the final maturity under the April 1st, 2019, which is the $60 million issue, decreases from $5.78 million down to $2,105,000. That's the recommended application of the additional levy to downsize that. And if you let your eyes go all the way to the far right, you're going to see that the exposure or the interest rate relief that will be taxpayer relief is about $128,625 per year, each year all the way through 2039, where it expands, of course, because the maturity would be paid off. So a little bit, let me highlight the highlights and I'll explain sorry, that didn't make sense, but let me talk about the 2 major advantages to doing this today, and then I'll explain a little bit of what a defeasance is and the fees associated with it to make sure we're transparent about that. So as Dr. Owens alluded to, on the far right in the blue, you'll see $1,975,777. That's future interest savings associated with doing a defeasance and applying the $3.7 million. Another advantage that we capture is at the lower right, which is because you're positively aided as a school district, we project that you'll get more money back from the state of Wisconsin next year, which is further property tax relief under Wisconsin state law and revenue limits that I'm sure most of you are aware of. So kind of combining those 2 together, really this action, we would say it creates about $2.2 million of property tax relief for the local communities and all the taxpayers here that you serve as a school board. So a defeasance is just a fancy way of prepaying debt early because your call date isn't here. So the money physically goes into a legal binding escrow, and it sits there earning interest and paying interest on behalf of the school district until, in this case, April 1st of 2027. So that's really what a defeasance is. If you see at the lower left hand, we outline the different players which are, and the fees associated with those. So there's legal counsel. You have a formal resolution that you will either take action on or not take action on this evening. You have us, PMA, who does all of the coordination. This is just one iteration of the analysis we did for Dr. Owens and looked at multiple different avenues. A lot of times we're doing more near-term debt if there's a need to have an operational or a capital referendum. To give you a little flavor, we did some of that, but there is no need for that at this point in time. But we like to show that to district administration so they understand their options. The CPA, so a CPA has to validate all of the numbers that we put together. This is a legal binding transaction, and it has to actually pay the debt on your behalf and do what we're showing. So a CPA validates all of that, and then it sits in that escrow agent, and then of course Standard & Poor's has to get a small $230 fee as well. So everybody has to have their hands out. So with that, be happy to answer any questions that you may have on what's being recommended this evening.
Do board members have any questions?
When you take this money out in the years like 2023 to 2027, you're gonna take like how much are you gonna take out in those years? Is that the 1.8 million and 2.02 million?
So
That's what we're paying anyway, right?
yes, so maybe I'm not positive if I'm going to try to answer the question. So if you look on the far left, and the far right column says total Fund 39 debt service under the gray, right? That's if you do nothing what your principal and interest payments would need to be on an annual basis. If you go under the blue, far right, total Fund 39 levy, that's the new one, and you'll see that it's lower every single year by $128,625. And then it jumps exponentially out in 2039 because the principal is being paid off as well as the $128,625 of interest is not being owed. So really it's a way to pay off your debt early and save around $130,000 of interest every single year because you're paying off that $3.7 million way far out into the future in 2039. That get at the heart of what you were asking?
No, I'm still not understanding. Maybe
He says,
somebody else
are you
has
asking
stuff.
how much we would be taking out to do this?
Well, you have to, till 2027, you gotta make your payments, right? So is what you're saying is we're gonna take the money that we might use to pay off more and put it in another account where it can earn more interest?
I see what you're saying. So the 3.7 million gets deposited at the escrow agent, and that's the additional levy that the board did this last fall. So that gets shifted to an escrow agent, and then under law, that's invested in U.S. Treasuries or state and local government securities, 1 to 2 different programs that are backed by the federal government, and it actually earns interest on behalf of the school district. So the escrow is actually paying the interest from 2023 until 2027. That is no longer an obligation of the school district. That interest earned is covering whatever those interest payments are associated with that debt until it can actually be paid off. So once it goes into the escrow, the interest and the principal are no longer an obligation or a liability of the school district. It's owned by the escrow agent, and they're paying that on an annual basis on your behalf to DTC and to eventually the investor.
After 2027.
Starting from 2024 actually, or 2023 this fall, all the way through 2027. And then 2027, the big payment happens where they're paying the 3.7 million on your behalf. That's the nice thing about the defeasance right now is because interest rates are higher, so it's able to earn enough to cover your interest payment, and you don't have to pay anything additional.
So I think part of it, there's so many numbers on this page, and the way I'm looking at it is if we take a look at the after defeasance below the blue column, the interest on the first bonds, the bonds that were issued April 1, 2019, we can see in that interest column that we're going to be paying less interest each year than we would have paid.
Correct.
If we don't do anything, we'll be back over here on the gray side, and we'll be paying that higher interest amount for the original 60 million in bonds over the course until, again, the call date, basically, and we won't have that bulk that will pay off at the end.
Correct.
And just for board members to remember, this came up as part of our conversation when we set our levy rate this year. and we had two options with respect to the levy. Tom provided us with both of them. One was that we kept our rate flat and were able to raise these additional dollars that could be then used for this defeasance for us to find that interest savings of 2+ million over the course. Or we could have reduced our levy by a little bit more. And the board chose to keep our levy flat to, raise these dollars for the purpose of allowing us to make a decision, at this point about whether we actually want to go through with the defeasance, which is go through with basically paying the interest, off, kind of earlier, prepaying like we would do on a mortgage, but we're like paying interest, kind of prepaying, and then ultimately being able to pay those bonds off and save taxpayer dollars along the way and then definitely at the end.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
percent accurate.
And then the total cost is the $15,130
Correct,
to do this.
correct.
Well, I guess I can make a motion here. I move to approve the resolution authorizing the transfer of funds, the establishment of an escrow account with respect to, and the defeasance of certain of the general obligations, school improvement bonds, Series 2019, dated April 1, 2019.
Second.
So that's a motion by Jeff and a second by Jen. Are there any discussion or questions on the motion?
Gee, you still look confused.
No, the more I think about it, the more I think I understand it. It put it into terms that I think would say you're making payments of $1,000 a month on a house, and you want to pay it off early, but the bank won't let you, so you take that money and you put it in another account where it can earn, and then when you can pay it off, then that starts.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, as long as it saves money, that's good.
It does.
And that 2.2 million or 2.1 million is over the period listed here, 2040 from now.
Correct, yep.
Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we do have to do a roll call vote on this, so I will go ahead and have Carlin call the roll.
Mr. Ebel?
Yes?
Ms. Portson? Yes. Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Robbie?
Yes.
Mr. Pope?
Yes.
Ms. Bushman?
Yes.
Ms. Erler?
Yes,
Motion carries.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Owens, if you would be so kind, address item C, the budget evaluation process.
The budget evaluation process. The apotheosis of plans. The pinnacle.
You're really building this up. Deliver.
Okay, to start things off, guess it doesn't fit on that one page, does it? With a recap, we have established a budget process and a review process of that budget. We analyze data, both past, present, and we keep an eye on what's happening with the biennial budget process and future things that may pop up, et cetera, as we go through this months-long process that's has continued since we started. We shared video presentations with a number of staff, and we'll continue to do that. We've secured their feedback, and we'll continue to move forward. I should point out that this phase, along with the other phases coming up, are not a lockstep thing where when you finish one, it's completely done, you never visit it. We will revisit these, we'll move through the different phases, return to them and do whatever kind of improvements we need to do or enhance them or enlarge them as we move forward. In phase 2, under reduction in control, you see 3 tabs up there. Each tab actually describes a slide that's will be coming up, so we'll have 3 slides coming up. One that will be talking about budget reduction and control items. Another that'll be exploring open position and program review items. And a third that'll be looking at trying to identify priority funding or reduction recommendations. One of the keys to this, of course, is to try to objectively prioritize these items as we move through. Those items will probably be a little difficult for folks in the audience to see unless you have binoculars, but you folks at the table have a copy of this, so it's a little bit easier for you. But the upper item is in red is our budget reduction cuts. Of course, columns are labeled with the current year and next year and the future. One of the items that we're looking at, cutting next year, has to do with software reductions. We've looked at a number of, our staffs have. I should point out that a lot of these items have had input from staff through the principals, up through the cabinet, et cetera. These weren't just picked out of randomly at the air. There's a lot of discussion on these items to date. This is an incomplete list. I should point that out as well. But software reductions, these are items that we felt we could eliminate without a negative impact on the curriculum or operations, et cetera. Building and budget departments were reduced 2%. This is on top of the fact that neither the budget departments or the building budgets per pupil have been increased for a number of years, so they've been held flat. So this is a reduction. Transportation cuts. Before we adopted this year's budgets, we cut $216,000 out of that budget, and then we plan next year to cut $25,000 and more out of that budget next year. HRA restructuring, $250,000. This has to do with our payment that we move towards the deductible of the high deductible healthcare plan. We have a reserve that we pay into that to make those payments, and we feel we can cut $250,000 out of that without negatively impacting the process. PMA defeasance is what you did this evening. At the time, we were estimating 1.944, and your action tonight, along with the savings and or additional money from the state in terms of general aid, will probably put that over. We'll put it over $2 million, so that's a good thing. And that is not in the general fund. That is in debt service, which is the 39 fund, the 30s. But the $130-some thousand a year that you saw on that chart that we don't have to levy helps us in the general overall levy by that reduction. So the overall levy will have us some additional room there. The items of extra time, straight time, and other media, these are some budget items, line items that in this year we're not going to be spending those. So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to cut those out of the budget next year. The item in the middle, budget reduction, underspent accounts. We've identified 3 accounts so far that we know are underspent. We're not making any prediction yet about definitely cutting those next year. We're going to continue to monitor those, but we're hoping to be able to cut some or all of that in this year budget coming up, but we'll get a better feel for that as time goes on. On the revenue side of the house, with the interest rates going up a little bit, we anticipate generating $100,000 more in earned interest from our investments, et cetera, than we originally planned. So that's a positive thing. Referendum interest rates. Again, this is not the general fund. This is 49 fund construction. However, it does help us in the general fund through this way. By generating the 2.3 million in interest and rebates. We did not have to dip into the 2.4 million completely from the general fund balance by making an expenditure in the general fund to cover that. So this is really the avoidance of spending that larger amount. And as we've reported in the progress of it each month, we do expect to probably spend about 400,000 out of that. So next year we may have an expense of about 400,000 out of the general fund to cover that. Electronic connectivity grant, we have applied for a grant of $2 million. I have not yet heard the results of that, if we've been awarded it or not, but that's something that we're working on. Closure of the 73 fund, we have all activity in the 73 fund has concluded as of June 30th. We have a remaining balance of $835,000 in there, and we are going to be closing that into the 10 fund this year, so we'll have a one-time revenue of $835,000, which will help us. Transportation aid, because of additional funding at the state, we did come in with an unexpected additional $114,210 in transportation aid. So that will be very helpful as well. The next slide is looking at program and position review. One of the things we want to try to establish is equitable criteria to assess the programs and the staffing openings. We need to look at the needs of the community, the families, the students, etc. We need to evaluate student achievement, consider safety, make sure our goals are aligned. Staff workload and capacity is a mix in all of this. Compliance with mandated areas, total cost, and of course the process of principal, director, and cabinet review of some of these items. We may accomplish this through a variety of matrices and perhaps rubrics, etc., as we work through that, but that is an ongoing and building process that we're working on. The next item under priority funding is strategic goal alignment, recruiting, and developing and retaining qualified staff. This is a big one that falls in line with, of course, our strategic goal. Its initial hurdle in this is this. We have to, we're looking at piloting a sick leave payout at retirement program bundled with our staff compensation. That's going to be addressed later this evening. And we want to try to establish, which we have been doing in the past, equitable benefits across employee groups. In the past, independent groups that have talked to the board and worked out their arrangements have come to have disequal plans and coverages, etc. But we have, as of late, developed that into quite uniform policies and benefits across all employee groups. It's actually been quite beneficial. So what's next? Well, we're trying to incorporate feedback from all of these listening sessions. We'll continue to do that. We want to hear what people have to say, what their recommendations are, etc. More people that can provide us with some positive, constructive input, the better. We want to apply decision criteria to the position review, whatever those rubrics might be, or whatever the criteria and the varied documents might be to help us lead to that end. And we want to identify and recommend items for priority funding or reduction, if that case may be. So that's kind of where we're going. That's the overview of the program. And as I mentioned, it's not a start-stop thing. It's a continuous flow among all of these various activities on the slides that you've seen, etc. So I guess that includes what I have to say.
So basically, it's just an update on the work that we're continuing to do. We'll continue to give the board updates each month. We're anticipating that in April, some additional information that will be shared will be on some of our contracted services and how we compare to other districts, and if there's any ways that we can make some adjustments.
I just want to thank the business office, Dr. Owens, and administration for the monthly updates. I think that's very helpful. I think it's appreciated by the board, and I'm sure the community as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
And just a quick question, the listening sessions, are we planning to have listening sessions for the larger community? Okay.
Yes, once we get more specific
Okay.
information, we'll do that.
Okay, and then just a quick question, just for clarification for the community, I think it would be helpful. When we saw the reductions in transportation, what did that pertain to? Was it the buses, the drivers?
It was a budget performance issue.
Okay,
We're performing much better than
Okay.
what we had anticipated.
and then is that same with early learning? That's why we
Yep.
underspent? Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Jake, go ahead.
The, on that same, slide that Jen was referring to, where it says $4,264,290 there, down at the bottom of 2022 to 23, is that your projected savings? Is that what that means?
No, that's just a total of those numbers. Some of those numbers up above are expenditures and some are revenue, so, the bottom area, 2.3 million is revenue, so we should probably just delete those totals off the bottom, but that's just pointing out that those are dollar amounts that we've been dealing with. It's not a total reduction of 4 million.
So we don't really know what the savings so far this year is projected to be.
And we won't, G, until the end of the year, but these are some projections that we're anticipating.
So we're rolling along with the original estimate of 4 million in debt, and these are things that might help us in that
Exactly.
to
And-
get lower?
Yep, and at the last business services meeting, Mike Kurtz actually gave a budget performance information update, and he's anticipating that we are going to perform better than expected, so we are hoping that it's not gonna be that 4.2 million.
Yeah.
His numbers, I think the breath he gave himself was, and this won't be exact, but I think it's in the ballpark, was between $1.25 million deficit to a 3.3 or something like
Yep.
that. So,
Actually-
and the worst case scenario, if he's saying the worst case scenario is not significantly near 4 million, but it's probably closer to 33.3, we could do much better depending upon the magic performed and the graces above.
Correct, but also remember, something also could go the opposite direction between now and the end of the year. So I don't think, we want to say that that's exactly what it's gonna be,
No,
because
no,
who
that's
knows
right.
what may or may not happen.
Gee, if you look at the center column, the 23, 24,
Yeah.
go to the bottom,
Yeah,
that is an accurate number. There's about $705,000 that we've already identified in potential cuts in next year's. And we've got another 600,000 that we're looking at possibly cutting that would put that over 1.3 million.
Good.
Roughly. And this is an incomplete list. This is only an initial list, so.
well, it's, just one thing is kind of interesting, where in the middle with the early learning, unfilled positions, unfilled sub-positions, I mean, it's gonna save money, but it's not money that we want to save
Right.
in that area.
Right.
Correct.
We're not looking at trying to do that again next year.
We are analyzing those positions through that matrix that Tom talked about, but it is not our intent right now to cut any of those positions.
And that was one of the comments that came up at one of the forums, because, right now we have an underspent account for unfilled subs. But it's not because we wanted the subs in the classroom, and a couple of the staff present noted, that they are continuing to have to miss their prep time, to have to miss their lunch. We're having to, combine classes in some of the elementary schools. I mean, we are struggling, we've been struggling all year because we are not able to hire enough subs. So that's probably one of the accounts that we clearly don't want to see underspent in the way it's been underspent. And so that's why that's showing up only in the first column, and it's showing up as an underspent amount versus a cut, which is what's up on the upper part of that one slide. But yeah, we just, again, the devil's in the detail of sometimes savings is really good, and sometimes savings, when it's underspent, has a really tough impact on our staff.
Correct.
Just a reminder that, to the public, that the month-to-month reports by administration and staff, those will be savings that they fine in their discussions or as they go along, and sometimes maybe some things that aren't so good. But while that has happened, we still have the work being done as far as the bigger picture and the overview and looking at efficiencies in a larger global image of our district and looking at some of those long-term savings that will probably have a greater impact upon the budget than these month-to-month adjustments.
Agreed.
Can I ask, you mentioned instances where teachers had to double up, take 2 classes. Were they paid
Yes.
an extra something for that?
Yep, they were. They are.
Okay, so they're, okay, I just want to make sure.
And just like quick kudos to the technology committee for the software reductions, because I know they were charged with going through a line item analysis and looking at utilization to see potential duplications in software that we had. And so the work is being done by people in the district.
Then that item was information only, so, Madam President,
All right.
thank you, Dr. Owens.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Dr. Owens.
So we will move into item 9, educational services, and I will turn that over to Chair G. Pope.
I have to find my page here. Okay, we had, let's see, 2 things, and they're both action items. The first one will be secondary science curricular resources purchase. Jeff is going to talk about that.
All right, I'll keep my part kind of at the beginning fairly quick. I've got 2 other presenters that are going to be presenting with me today. One of them is Alex Kitchener, who is our secondary curriculum and instruction coordinator. And then the other one is going to be Carrie Reese. She's one of our science teachers. So what I wanted to do is kind of come to you guys to talk through the process we're going through for the adoption of a science curriculum. So we started that at the beginning of this year. We had 7 through 12 teachers begin by engaging in that process. One of the first things we did was we identified very quickly that we have a gap right now. So what we realized is currently our 6th grade students and teachers don't have access to a core curriculum for science. So right away we adjusted and added 6th grade into our group. After we did that, we broke our group up into 2 pieces. So we had our 9 through 12 group approach this from a high school perspective, and then our 6 through 8 group really targeted the work that we were going to be doing at that level. Both groups, first thing we did was look at our standards. Started to identify our standards, our learning outcomes, and what our students were going to need. What was great in dividing these 2 groups is high school is really different. We have a lot of great electives at SPASH, which is awesome. But that means that having a singular core curricular resource to meet physics needs, chemistry needs, environmental science, biology just doesn't work. So what we did is that group came together. We identified a combination of lab equipment, some textbook replacements, and then online digital textbooks that teachers can actually create on their own. And we built that process together for the high school to meet their needs for their individual classes. Then our 6 through 8 group actually went through a formal process of a curriculum vetting and review. So they actually identified and reviewed multiple different options, and Alex and Carrie are going to talk about that a little bit more. Through that process, 2 were identified, and we piloted both in the classrooms. We got feedback from teachers and feedback from students. That group unanimously selected STEM scopes as the option that they'd like to go forward with. I think from my end, what I was most proud of with this group, and Alex will attest to hearing it from me every time we met, was I wanted to make sure we stayed on budget. We needed to meet our students' needs, and we needed to stay inside of our budget, and this group did an awesome job with that. They had great discussions around the table, and in that we identified not only were we able to extend and add a grade level in, so we have a core resource for grades 6, 7, and 8. We were able to target and provide for the needs of our high school classes. We were also able to provide part-time coaches. So we're going to have a part-time coach available at the high school level, the junior high level, and our 6th grade level. And we're doing that with interns through the university, which I'm really excited about because it gives us a great option to be able to vet future teachers. And what will happen is these interns teach in the classroom, and those veteran coaches then are able to get out in other classrooms and help our teachers. So that was kind of the model. So grand total for it, I don't have the exact figure, was a shade over $168,000 for all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
So as Jeff said, I had the opportunity to work with 6 through 8 science teachers throughout this curriculum adoption process. And as you can see here, some of our non-negotiables, the big one was stay within our budget. That number was about $200,000. Another big non-negotiable for us is that we wanted to have a K-12 option for support. So we wanted something that was going to support 8th grade students all the way down to our kindergarten students. We were able to get 6 through 8 this year, and then the next time this resource is up, we'll look at expanding that down. A quality digital component to help support our students in the learning of 21st century skills. State and NGSS, or Next Generation Standard Science Alignment. Those are our national science standards. Fidelity of implementation. So when our coaches go into a classroom and watch a teacher and help them expand or grow within their implementation of STEM scopes, what are some specific things that they should look for in every lesson that they see a teacher teaching from that STEM scopes curriculum, and a trust in the program. And then lastly, the prioritization of the common resource for core classes that Jeff has kind of alluded to. The timeline for this process, all the way back in August, we met, and that was kind of the first step in where we realized that we needed to step down into 6th grade and get some of our 6th grade teachers involved in this process. But we sat down and we took a look at a lot of different science resources that then teachers could then suggest to take a look at a little bit more in depth on that October PD day, with the caveat being that they met all of our non-negotiables. So if there was a resource that teachers wanted to look at that unfortunately was going to be, $15 or $16 per kid, it wasn't going to fall within that budgetary component, so it wasn't something that we could look at. That being said, the 2 options that we were able to move forward with on December 7th, STEM Scopes and Discovery Education, are 2 very high quality science resources. So we're still able to move forward with 2 great resources here to then pilot in January and February. We were able to get some PD for our teachers right away at the end of November and on that December 7th PD day to make sure that we were ready to go and prepared to pilot both of these resources with students. Throughout the course of that pilot, they probably got super annoyed by me sending continuous emails asking for feedback, but they got a weekly feedback form via Google form that allowed them to rate each resource that they were using on a 5-point Likert scale, 5 always being the highest, 1 always being the lowest. And what we did was we evaluated these resources on the 5E instructional model for science. First E is engage, explore, explain, and then evaluate was the last E that we were looking at. December 17th, we all came together here in the boardroom and had no holds barred, and we were able to decide STEM scopes. As Jeff said, unanimously, which was awesome. We had a lot of representation at the table throughout that meeting. And throughout that conversation, some of the guiding questions that we had were, which resource is going to support all students the best? Which resource is going to support all teachers? And which resource has weaknesses that we can supplement? One of the things that we were upfront with throughout the course of this process was that we really wanted to look at these resources with a critical eye, understanding that no science resource is going to be perfect, but which of these 2 resources is going to have weaknesses that we can supplement with other curricular materials and that kind of thing. So those were our 3 guiding questions throughout that conversation. It was really, we were here all afternoon, great conversation centered around each resource. And as you can see, they scored very closely, which we kind of expected because they are 2 high quality resources. But this is the feedback from staff as it pertained to that Likert scale. STEM Scopes scored slightly higher than Discovery Education, but really the devil was in the details as far as what put STEM scopes ahead of discovery education. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Vries to talk about that.
Sure. This is a slide showing the team that was working. We had 2 6th grade teachers that joined us to have discussion about what would be the best fit to work with them to have a nice continuancy from 6th grade all the way through 8th. We have our 7th grade team between both junior highs and the 8th grade team between both junior highs. And then really wonderful conversation added with our English language teachers and also the SPED teacher from PJ's. So that was very helpful in our discussion when we actually got down to the nitty-gritty of deciding what was going to be the best. So our overall comparison, we did different units. 7th grade did 2 units revolving around atoms, one around just the introduction, and then one around molecules. And we started with STEM scopes first. So some things that I thought about as we showed the Likert scale, we were very, very critical, especially when we were STEM scopes. We were like, we're just not handing any points out on this. And so I think had we done the reverse, we probably would have scored STEM scopes even higher than what it was scored, because we just weren't going to hand out we loved anything, because we were really told to be critical. So anyway, it was very user-friendly. We enjoyed working with it. I'm working with it right now, adding things in. We're working with the 5Es, which lends itself to phenomena-based learning. So in science, we've been showing phenomena, like different things that happen. Right now we're talking about inherited traits and how that happens. And both had a great setup for phenomena-based learning, but it was way more user-friendly to be working with the 5Es in the STEM scope. And we are able to get to the documents in an easier manner. It will be great for new teachers. And also we found that with the students, when we compared that to Discovery Education and the way Discovery Education was set up, it was more challenging for students of different abilities to keep up with that pace and follow that pace. And it's really not as friendly of a resource, to be honest. I think that covers what I want to say about the resources. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any after this. So the students' feedback, we did do STEM scopes first, and then we did Discovery Ed. And again, when we looked at the two and compared the two, the students looked back at STEM scopes and they said that's how they enjoyed learning the most. I mean, right now I'm doing like I said, a unit, and the other day we were in one of the Explore activities and I had a student say, I just love this. And it's just so fun as a teacher to see students really engaged and really enjoying it. And here's the detail too, as well as the STEM scopes with the students. 441 responses. They also voted to have STEM scopes, and it was quite a delay in that vote as well. So after they had spent a month in Discovery Education, they still went back to the prior month and preferred the STEM scope experience.
Any questions?
Thank you very much. That was well done.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
I would just,
Go ahead,
Jeff.
Chris. No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I called you Jeff. Oh, God. Just kudos, Jeff. I understand you looked at so many things and the presentation at Ed Services, but so much work was put into it, and adding that 6th grade, and then looking at both how will students at different levels be able to access this, and how much was put into. What about the teachers teaching this? I mean, you've covered so many amazing things, the detail that you put in, and then the dollars that you looked at and said, we need to be aware of that. So just thank you very much. What a great process.
I'll just say these guys were really great to work with. We've started before, we've piloted before years ago, and then we didn't unfortunately go through. It's so nice to have a team willing to just, here's what we're going to do, and it's going to happen, and it is.
Great.
They're great.
Go ahead, Jen.
Just a quick comment. I appreciate the creativity with the interns. I think, coming from talent management, you're building a healthy pipeline. They're networking. They're getting exposure to teachers in our district and the district. And so I appreciate this, the teacher intern idea. And that we have the funding because we were under budget to do so, so.
Jeff, I talked to Jeff about this in our ed services meeting. To me, that was the one weakness in the program. I liked everything else. So the interns can only teach one semester.
Yep, so we'll have, the
So
way
they'll
we,
get a new teacher in the second semester.
a new intern will come into the classroom in second semester.
What if we like that first intern?
Then
Can we hire them?
If we have a
There's
position.
no
we have a
money.
job.
What?
If we have
If we
a
have a
position.
job.
So those students will be getting 2 different interns in that 1 year.
The students will, but you gotta remember, the teacher will stay with them throughout the course of the whole year. So nowhere in the process as we talk to teachers are we, gonna do a hard and fast cut. So at the start, Mr. Nyman and myself both were interns. So it was great. We actually, it's really like your student teaching experience, except you're really opting in at that point to say that I really want to have a classroom of my own. So they're pre-vetted by the university. Our teachers still will go through the interview process. And then you'll have that time at the beginning of the year where they will be able to stay in their room as the teacher the whole time until the intern feels like they're ready to go. And they will do that transition out for that process.
So the people that are selected to be part-time coaches, what is part-time about it?
So the intern can take 50% of the lead teaching role during the day.
All semester?
Yep.
So the part-time coach will be involved, be in the room half the time?
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be similar to what Jen Bowling's doing, but it's 50 and 50?
Correct.
Then the fact that they have to change in the middle of the year is kind of, is not a good thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to keep them and there's probably not gonna be money, say we get a real gem and wanna keep that person, we're just gonna have to let them go.
Yeah. I mean, and that was mid-year for me. The fortunate part, I think I would look at that as a lot of them sub. So that's what I ended up doing. I did mine in Wausau. So at semester, I ended up subbing and getting more experience around the district, and then, was available then to,
Well, it's
move to the
good
better
for you,
district
but
after that.
I'm worried about the kids, it's, on the one hand, they're getting an intern first who's gonna be getting their feet wet and everything. Then they're gonna, at mid-year, they'll switch to a different intern. It's gonna go through the whole same process again. I know that's part of the program, that's part of the budget. My suggestion would be, instead of waiting for people to apply, that we talk to UWSB. And I know, I have student teachers that I look at them and say, you could be interning. This is a waste of time for you, could be interning. Let's go get that person and not wait for them.
Already
All right.
have a list, and I've already been contacting
You're
them.
so smart, Jeff.
Well, we've got a good board, so I knew the questions you guys would ask.
But next year, is it the same arrangement again, or are the part-time coaches going back into teaching?
Part-time coach will go back in the classroom.
Okay.
And then, we're looking at this as an option for Chris and I to look going forward as what we might want to do with other content areas.
Okay.
So
Thank
kind
you.
of the model we'd like to operationalize across all disciplines, not just specific to science and math, which we've been able to do the last 2 years. But, right, this is a model that, right, I think, fortunately, Jeff and I had similar experiences for student teaching as interns, so we see the benefit, both for the individuals that are selected to be interns, but also for the district.
Well, some people can intern, some can't.
Correct.
So I want to make sure we get the ones that can.
Correct.
Yep.
I just wanted to say I was very pleased to see the respect and regard between teachers such as Carrie, who I know is very experienced, very competent, working with district staff in a way that is collegial, lots of respect, lots of regard, and between the two of you did some really good things, and that was really a working relationship rather than being directed, and that's very evident from your presentation, and I really think that's very highly commendable.
Thank you. It was a great group.
I also want to note the fact that you took that overall look at what's going to be ease of use for all kids. And you were able to bring in the unique L voices and SPED voices and really take a look at that. I think we're very fortunate that they both sound like very good resources, but that one of them clearly was up on top and especially with that ease of use, which I think is so important, especially for this age group of kids. So, anyhow. Any other questions or comments?
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So I would be looking for a motion to approve the secondary science curricular resource purchase and instructional materials budget as presented.
So moved.
Second.
So motion by Chris, second by Jen. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all in favor with aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed with nay? Motion carries. Go ahead, Henry.
Okay, and the second thing, for action is the Human Growth and Development Advisory Committee final recommendations. Done a ton of work. Chris had a lot of things to say about it at the meeting, so go ahead, Chris.
Right, and we have been very intentional about trying to keep Ed Services Committee and the full board apprised of the work that's been going on since September 22nd was our initial meeting, following the appointment of the ad hoc committee to complete a formal review of the Human Growth and Development curriculum across elementary, junior high, and secondary sites. There are several members of the committee that have joined us here, so I'll be passing the baton to them as we come to their assigned slides. I want to just begin by reviewing quickly what the purpose and what the intended outcomes were for the advisory committee was really to review the current curriculum, provide suggestions, feedbacks, and potential edits that we would bring forward to the full board for approval. Also to review parent opt-out notification processes and procedures and timeline. And then, as we're doing tonight, make final recommendations to the board for approval. I wanted to just review quickly here statutory language, which highlights the board's requirement to appoint an ad hoc committee that would complete the formal review. I think I mentioned this at our Ed Services Committee. Jeff and I felt guilty multiple times because we reached out to individuals to be part of this committee indicating that maybe we could get this done in 3 to 4 months, and it ended up being more like 6, and a total of 7 meetings that all ran at least 90 minutes in length. So in between each of those meetings, advisory committee members also committed an extensive amount of time to come in on their own and review every teacher resource and every student resource. Following that review, they were able to provide individual feedback that would inform our full group discussion before we made final decisions on the recommendations we would bring forward. We began the review process by reviewing community data just to sort of build an understanding of the why in terms of why this learning specific to human growth and development is so essential for students today. Also understanding what students are learning at each respective grade level. So committee members developed a very deep understanding of the spiraling that happens in curriculums that are designed. So learning that's introduced at one grade level and then spirals back the next year, the next year, the next year, slowly adding an additional layer of complexity to each of those topics that are discussed at each grade level. Our committee also took a significant amount of time at the beginning of the work diving into content standards, so the national health standards as well as the Wisconsin health standards. And we looked at how content from one grade level is connected to content that's covered at the next grade level. We established outcomes in the committee and the committee purpose. We reviewed the statutory and policy requirements. We do have a specific policy here in the Stevens Point School District, Policy 2414, which says that this review has to occur. The cadence of that review is every 3 to 6 years. So we intend to stay within compliance both of statute and our policy. It allowed stakeholders the opportunity to review the instructional materials and submit individual feedback regarding course materials that informed our full group conversations. Next, we focused on consensus-based decision-making, which is very typical in a lot of committee work. I'll allow Jeff to talk about that just momentarily.
Yeah, and this one was really quick. You know, for the consensus-based decision-making, really, for me, we had those bullets, and we worked together. We had norms that we worked with our committee on. And what I really felt was important was it gave us the ability to have really good discussions as we came together as a group. So we came in with that expectation. No one's going to get everything they want. It really is that process of us coming together and talking through it. But then, in the end, we agreed as a group to what we're presenting to you today. So the next one, this just kind of lays out, we wanted to show you guys what we gave each of our committee members. So as you can see, we have curriculum materials laid out there. This included links to, like Chris identified, the standards that teachers were teaching within those corresponding courses. They got to dig down into individual activities within those different curriculum materials. And then for every single grade level and or course, we asked every committee member to complete a feedback form. And what was really nice about this is it let us honor every voice in the room. Because what we did is we took all of that feedback together, we stripped off names and emails, and then we shared that back to the whole group anonymous. So that everybody was able to see, and we were able to walk through and talk about each one of those feedback items for every single course, which was great as we worked through the process as a team.
Again, we wanted to be really intentional about those who might not feel comfortable sharing their ideas as part of a whole group discussion would still have the ability to share their thoughts and their recommendations. We began with reviewing opt-out procedures and notification for parents, and I'll allow Edison to introduce himself and talk to you a little bit about what we decided on opt-out.
All right, my name is Edison Dockin. I was one of the student representatives for this committee. And for opt-out information, we developed a sort of uniformity with each individual elementary 7 through 8 and 9 through 12. Grade 4 used to have a bit of a different look to it than 5 and 6, and we decided to make that more similar to the others and less confusing for the parents of the students. We really like to emphasize that the parents of the children can look at the curriculum from the teacher and really analyze it and see how they feel about it. And in the 9 through 12 courses, we, because they are electives except for health, all the stuff is in all of the knowledge that you is acquired is listed within the course description. Yeah, and here are all the considerations and recommendations for our opt-out discussion. Elementary school, we're considering a digital option in the future, just as times get more advanced. It's a great idea. 7 through 8, we are considering developing a more consistent alternate learning opportunity for students who opt out. There's really nothing laid down in paper on what the students would do if they were to opt out, so we're looking to maybe go to individual teachers for that information. And for the recommendations, we are revising and make 4th grade letter as one letter. There were 2 letters, one for if the child is a male and one if the child is a female. And we'll continue with requiring active consent at all elementary grades, meaning that we will not move forward with teaching unless every single parent has filled out a form or guardian. 7th and 8th grade, add more specific language to come into review the instructional materials. I was talking about that earlier in the previous slide. And same thing with 9 through 12 pretty much, except showing that it is in the course review and the course information. I believe. Let's hand it to you. I'm not sure who I'm handing it to.
Okay. It's Kristen next. Yes.
Can we ask some questions about that before going?
Sure.
For the opt-out procedure, can they opt out of the whole course?
It is possible.
If they opted out of, so there are, the opt-out would be specific to content that's specific to human growth and development standards, right? So they couldn't opt out of the entire course because it's a required course as using health as an example, but they could opt out of that particular portion of the course.
In the elementary grades?
In the elementary grades, they couldn't opt out of the entire course. They would opt out of those specific lessons. And on the parent notification that we've developed, the form actually has parents list by specific lesson, by checking, and then signing that they would like their child to participate in those specific lessons. So if they choose not to or to opt out, they would not be participating in the class discussion or the lesson for that particular day.
If the parents don't send anything back, then you're saying they would be, the class can proceed, but their student would be viewed as being opting out.
They would be not included, right? So before we would opt them out, there obviously would be contact that we would attempt to make with parents and guardians to be able to get that authorization to be able to proceed with instruction. But if we did not have that, we would not provide them with the instruction absent the signature.
It's a lot of calling back and forth.
It's a lot of emailing and a lot of calling back and forth. We did actually have that discussion as part of a larger group, and teachers indicated that the number of instances that occurs is very small. So they typically receive those signed letters back relatively quickly. Yeah, so there's efficiency there.
And Chris, is the detailed lessons for opt-out, is that a new addition that you guys are doing as a result of the committee? Or is that something that had been done in the past?
So it's new at grade 4. It's not
Okay.
new at grade 5 or grade 6.
Okay.
So grade 5 and 6 all along were by specific lesson having parents opt in with a signature and a check mark next to that specific lesson with its title. At grade 4, we were not doing that, so that was a suggested revision to the 4th grade opt-out form.
I appreciate the consistency, yeah.
So those children who opt out will get an alternative curriculum.
Correct.
But, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Edison.
Edison said that that's not necessarily made yet.
Correct.
It's in the process.
With consistency at this point in time, because if they opt out of a specific lesson, they're given an alternative activity that still reinforces the same content. But what we have not come up with consistent lessons for each of those that potentially a child could opt out of. So when we put that down as considerations for moving forward, we want to bring consistency there as well. We just did not have that in terms of identifying alternative contact for those that opt out at this point.
That's
That's
to
a
come.
goal.
That's to come.
Yeah. And I don't know why this is no longer working.
It's probably tired.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting, Edison, I'm just so impressed that you came to present and speak in front of the board, and yeah,
Appreciate it.
yeah, good job.
This is a great opportunity because
Yeah.
a lot of times when you're in like,
Sure, what happened?
Senate, things like that, you'll be working within the school, but it's really great to go out in the community.
Yeah, good job.
And all of the time you spent on the committee. I mean, that was
Yes,
a lot of.
yes.
And Edison did a great job at the committee level.
Interesting stuff. I look forward to hopefully more opportunities like this.
Yeah.
I really enjoy being a part of a greater committee.
Awesome.
And he gets to talk one more time tonight. So
Oh,
you're not
good,
gonna-
okay.
All right, I'm Kristen Thompson. I was a parent representative. I have a child at Washington, PJs, and Spash, so I run the whole gamut at the moment. I'm covering grade 4 right now. As they mentioned, we did the feedback forms and we did go through every concern that people brought up. So if you look at the slide, every little bullet underneath a unit is a concern that was brought up on the feedback form. So we addressed all of them point by point, and that's what helped us to come up with whether or not we wanted to make a recommendation to you or not about a concern. So if I go to, I thought I was going to the next one.
That's it.
There we go. So this is the recommendations we're making to you. If you look at Unit 1, there were some survey type language, and so based on the PPRA, which, oops, I'm breaking the remote. The PPRA can get a little dicey about collecting information about households without consent. So we're just recommending that anything that seems like it might be a survey, teachers just don't collect it. As long as we're not collecting it, then we're not analyzing it. We're staying completely clear of PPRA. So that's going to be our recommendation there. We didn't have any revisions for units 2, 3, or 4. For unit 5 in 4th grade, we want to add some information on vaping because currently that is not covered, and we think that's a big miss. In our day and age, there's vaping around, and we need to cover that. And then the main thing for Unit 6 was just to note that in the opt-out form that Edison just covered, that we will cover the boys and girls separately. And so just to make sure that we're letting parents know that when we're talking about the specifics, they will be together for all the units except for the ones that specifically cover the different body parts, and then they will be separate for those. So that's grade 4.
Thank you, Kristen. And the language specific to vaping comes up again in grade 5 and in grade 6 in the spirit of spiraling content. So you will see that referenced there. It was an area that the committee felt strongly about covering in terms of risk factors related to AODA. Maybe you did break it.
Did I really break it? Sorry.
Nope, you're okay. I'm gonna just go here. Okay, And for grade 5, here is again a listing of all of the recommendations that were provided by individual committee members. And we did have some recommendations for final approval in Unit 1, reinforcing again the value of identifying a trusted adult. That was covered quite explicitly in this particular unit. Also to share with students the availability of both 911 and 988 resources. That was not specifically called out in any of the instructional lessons, but committee members felt strongly about ensuring that students were aware of the availability of those resources. We did not have any suggestions for revision in units 2, 3, or 4. Again, in unit 5, similar to what we saw in grade 4, was the resources specific to vaping. And in unit 6, we actually did remove a whole lesson. Lesson 37 was recommended to be removed, and this was recommended by several committee members. We had a lot of discussion about this particular recommendation, and lesson 37 introduced the concept of abstinence without the context of instructing students on sexual intercourse prior, and they felt like there was some misalignment there. But when students got into grade 6, they felt like it was introduced in a more logical sequence. So the idea of if removing that lesson, the committee was comfortable with proceeding in terms of making that recommendation. They were very cautious about making a recommendation to remove something like a whole lesson. So we did talk about it for a considerable amount of time on that evening. In grade 6, there were fewer recommendations and there was less feedback in terms of what we might recommend for final approval. In Unit 1, there was just the one recommendation, and this really comes in the form of guidance that we would provide to teachers. And this came by way primarily of our student representatives. They had some strong opinions about the use of language specific to positive peer pressure versus peer power. They didn't like the content, they didn't like the context that peer power had, and they really felt strongly about teachers using language that was more aligned with positive peer pressure rather than peer power. So that was the only change that was recommended at grade 6. And I'm going to pass it to Carla to talk a little bit about facts at grade 7 and 8.
Yeah, is that working?
No, it's not.
You'll click. Hi, it's okay. I'm Carla Landwehr. I teach Family and Consumer Science at PJ Jacobs Junior High. Our junior high students all take a quarter of Family and Consumer Science when they are in 7th grade. So when we were looking at the human growth and development content in 7th grade, the 2 units that we looked at, the first one is about the developmental assets, which is looking at what teenagers need to be successful in the world today, and kind of reviewed a lot of that information and that material and didn't really recommend any revisions or changes, which was kind of reaffirming that we've been doing a pretty good job. I've been in the district 16 years and haven't had a lot of guidance, so this has been nice to kind of let us know that we have kids in mind and we're doing good things. When kids get to 8th grade, all 8th graders at both junior highs, again, they take a semester of Family and Consumer Science, and we have 4 units in that semester-long class. The first one being wellness and stress. That one we looked at didn't really need many changes or things to be added. Unit 2 is a unit on nutrition and dietary guidelines, and to attest to the fact that we looked at every single comment by every single committee member, someone brought up a comment about sugar and how that is addressed in our course. Not necessarily human growth and development specific related, but we looked at that and I gave some feedback as to what we do teach about sugar, because we do. And then in our 3rd unit, which is our human growth and development one, presented all the content, all the materials. It's a little different in a semester-long course because we teach it continuously for a couple of weeks, whereas in the 5th and 6th and 4th grade, it might pop in and out. We are in depth covering human growth and development, and it's coming right up, and the kids are excited. We didn't notice anything that really primarily needed to change. It was really good to have conversation, though, with community members and health professionals and talk about what we all are seeing from teenagers today, because it's crazy. And then our last unit that we do is an alcohol and drug awareness, and again, no major concerns presented in that unit. So we're going to keep on trucking.
Thank you, Carla.
Yeah.
And I'll allow Steve to introduce himself.
Good evening. My name's Steve Johnson. I was one of the healthcare providers on the committee. I also am a parent of a student at each level in terms of high school, junior high, and elementary. So it was just nice to bring two different perspectives as I read through all of that material. And I think Chris and Jeff did a great job really facilitating a meeting on what was a lot of different diverse backgrounds and passions to get this right. So looking through the high school material, I think the two phrases that come to mind were just really just updating the material to be more of a 2022, 2023 kind of format. Several examples that are on there. Unit 3 is one in terms of I think the original material called for a personal ad in the newspaper. And so we were just trying to have that discussion through many different perspectives to say, well, maybe there's a version of updating that through some guidance. To say that maybe there's some more dating apps, use some more language that is going to be representative, including Unit 4 about the Dear Abby kind of thing, a dated material, who's going to look on a website, listen to a radio, or where am I going to go for that information when I have a question? Where am I going to be able to ask for that? So social media definitely is something that was part of this recommendation for giving guidance to teachers as they're presenting that. And certainly I want to point out that each teacher that was participating and offering us their perspective did it with great care, trying to be faithful to the material, staying within what the curriculum was listed, and really trying to stay on target, knowing how easily a discussion can go awry or down a different path or rabbit hole. And so really getting some of these points clear was important to all of us. And then Unit 5 with the substance abuse, just like the vaping for the younger grades, trying to look at the impression of marijuana and some other things that are coming into play, just to make it on much more relevant to where things are, much more dated. The teachers may relate to some of those words about Dear Abby, but some of these kids would have no clue where is that coming from. Successful Teens was one of these kind of more straightforward, simple discussions where when we had a chance to go through and dig through each of those assignments and give feedback, there weren't any changes that were across the board, so this made it really simple to kind of jump through this class and just stick with no revisions and go through the material as done. And I think it was really about this projecting forward of can you really look ahead, can you be smart in all of these areas about relationships and future, food resources, food dollar. I think budgeting came up a little bit there, trying to empower kids as they wrap up in this section and looking ahead in their lives, their careers, those kind of things. So very straightforward in that class.
Thank you, Steve.
Chris.
So for infants and toddlers, for Unit 1, there was a suggestion about looking into various childcare settings and a deeper understanding of trauma in children, but due to the fact that infants and toddlers is a dual credit program through Midstate, further programs within Midstate, only Midstate, would have that material, so we had no revisions to make for all of that. And for Unit 6, much earlier on in the elementary, with surveys, we need to clarify whether surveys are not graded or collected, and that was about it for infants and toddlers. There weren't many issues with that.
Also, both of the last two and the one that Kristen is about to cover were all elective courses, so that's important to note.
Yeah, so I have adulting, which is an elective, as Chris just mentioned. You can see the bullets, most are suggestions and not actual issues or problems that we felt we needed to cover. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that that is really where we landed. So we didn't have any revisions for Unit 1. Unit 2 is on financial and budgeting, and they don't talk anything about technology costs, so we felt that was a big miss. Phones aren't free. We shouldn't let kids continue to think that, so we need to make sure that's part of their budgeting. Unit 3 gets into dating and relationships, and we really wanted to make sure that we were giving guidance to teachers to make sure that examples include all sorts of different relationships, not just always man and woman. And then also there are different manners and etiquette lessons, and they talk about consent, but consent wasn't defined anywhere. And we felt that was a big miss. If you're going to be talking about consent, we want to make sure everyone's on the same page as to what that actually means. So just recommending that that definition be added somewhere. Unit 4 is marriage and the family. First and foremost, we want to be more inclusive and let people know it's okay if marriage and engagement is not in your path. That doesn't have to be your path. So make sure that teachers are talking about that as you're talking about this stage. It's an understandable stage in life to cover, but that's not going to be everyone's path. And then there's a big unit in this lesson, or a big project in this unit that is about planning a wedding. And it's got a lot of budgeting and looking ahead and strategy and all that stuff. That's a great project. We just want to really recommend that they're being inclusive of everything, non-traditional weddings, different cultures for weddings, anything like that that a student might want. And it doesn't have to be locked into, you know, one type of wedding. And then Unit 5, we didn't have any suggestions or revisions for.
Perfect. And that brings us to next steps. And the next steps really are our educational services staff. So that would be Alex, our secondary curriculum coordinator, and Darla Pinaski, who's our elementary curriculum coordinator, will be going out to meet with all of the instructors that provide and teach this content at every grade level, at every building. So between now and the end of this academic year, all of that training and updating of materials and instructional materials will occur so that the full rollout of these recommendations that we ask you to approve tonight will be implemented in the fall of 2023. And also ensuring that we're providing all staff with the updated opt-out materials and procedures. That concludes our presentation, and I'm happy to entertain questions if there are any.
If I can, so I just want to say I was really, really grateful to be able to observe this committee. I wasn't giving input, but you heard Kristen, Edison, Steve, and Carla. These committee members were just unbelievable. The commitment, the information that they shared, and the whole structure of the committee. I've probably been to and part of hundreds of committee meetings, and I have to tell you, this is one of the best. I think the information shared and the way the process was put together, the teachers that presented, it makes you so proud to be a board member, to have teachers present the way they did and how they interact with kids. Just amazing. So I really appreciate it, and thank you, Jeff and Chris. I think you did the consensus was really great. And the ability for people to share information. Some of these topics, these life skills, they're difficult to have that conversation. But to be able, and I read a lot of the curriculum, which I wish I'd had at the ages of some of these kids, and even as an adult. So the way they were able to share their information comfortably, take this out, I don't believe in this, or whatever, it was done so well that their names weren't attached to it, but the information was important. So just wanted to say it was a really good experience, and thankful to all the committee members. They did a really good job. Any other questions or discussion?
I just want to thank all of you. You're here at the end of the night.
Yeah,
This is the last time that we'll have you. You've been here for 2.5 hours.
Right.
So you probably know more about school board, school finances, everything.
There's a test on the defeation.
And definitely human growth and development. They know
Right.
way more about that
But
than
anyway,
me.
we appreciate you hanging around and being at the end, pretty close to the end of our agenda tonight. So I will be looking for a motion to approve the human growth and development curriculum recommendations as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Chris and second by Dennis. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor with aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed with nay? Motion carries. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
This has to be redone, like, did you say every 6 years or something?
Every 3 to 6.
3 to 6, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Good job, people.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Great job. Good
Good
work.
night.
Good job.
Safe travels home. So
Community members.
we're moving into policy update. 5340, student accidents / illness / concussion and sudden cardiac arrest. I'm going to turn that over to Corey.
Sure. So we're continuing to work through our policies. The board made a decision a few years back to use Neola, which was the WASB recommended group. So Steve LaValle has been spending time with Carlin and I, and then Carlin and I work through the policies with the appropriate administrators. So we've got a group that we're working on right now, but this one, the updates to the policy are all statute driven. And you can see the changes in your information. So basically, we're just following state statute, so we recommend that you approve this policy tonight so that we are in compliance with statute.
I'm just curious, how do they come up with this particular update on sudden cardiac arrest?
It's statute driven. It's all by law.
Don't you think that's recent events have?
Right, and I would
Probably.
say,
Sure.
yep, I
Yeah.
would say it's recent events of
Okay.
cardiac arrest,
Okay.
yeah, among students. Yeah, which prompted some of the change. I think the only thing that really changed in terms of the statutory language, some of the statutory language changed. We needed to update and change some practice to align to statutory requirements, but we are in full alignment with the notification requirements that are now included in statute.
And just a reminder to board, you know, we, I want to say now it's been about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, literally went through every single policy. We have many policies. And we went through every single policy with Neola in preparation for this transition. And so we paid them basically to work with us to update all of our policies. And now we continue to contract with them to provide us with any updates. Typically, they're coming through the state legislature. What was happening prior to that was we would get a notice in from WASB that we needed to adopt a new policy. And then it just fell on the lap of somebody in the district who may have never put a policy together before, didn't have any background information. And the benefit of Neola is they provide this service to school districts throughout the state of Wisconsin. And so they are preparing these policies that are focused on covering exactly what the legislature needs. We do, as a local, school district, have the ability, in some cases, they provide options, but oftentimes there aren't any. It's just we've got to have what we've got to have. So Carlin's been monitoring those behind the scenes. The board at that time made the determination that if the revision coming through from Neola was, like a position name had changed, or there was a minimal change that was required in a policy, oftentimes it might have been a reference to a statute, and it was a changed statute, but it was basically the same. That administration had the authority to handle all of those, but that the board maintained authority for substantive additions, changes, deletions, in terms of the policies that we're looking at as a board. So,
Go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Gene.
Well, I had a question before we move on. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I know I had asked you about, Corey, about possibility of having all teachers certified, CPR and use of the AEDs and so forth. And I know you said it was too expensive. I would just ask the board, keep in mind that by some miracle, if we end up with money, or if we could figure out what it would cost, that we might be able to do that in the future. And also, I asked my student teachers how many of them are certified. I'm surprised at how many are. They were lifeguards or something like that. If we could talk to UWSP, their education department, as a board, and say, why don't you put this in your curriculum? Because we may ask prospective employees, are you certified? It may be a question, I don't know if it is, it may be a question on our interviews.
And there's organizations that do offer CPR training for free. I believe like the Epilepsy Foundation of Wisconsin is one of them to schools.
Right.
Districts.
We work with Midstate, actually. Some of our paramedics in town help us and our nursing staff. So we do train, but I'll tell you, just of the required people that we have to have trained, it's hard to find the time to do it. It's a 4-hour training. The certification lasts for 2 years, and it's just getting everybody together. It's tough.
I would
But I
submit,
agree.
I
the
would
board-
submit to you that it might be hard to find the time, but it might be the best time we
Agreed.
spend
Agreed.
with our teachers.
One thing to keep in mind too, each building is required to have an emergency response team, and everybody that's on that emergency response team absolutely has to be certified. Our coaches have to be certified. So we do have a large number of staff that are, but definitely not everybody at this point. Something to consider.
Any additional comments, questions? All right, then I will look for a motion to approve the updates to policy 5340 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jen and second by Dennis. Any discussion or questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor with aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed with nay? Motion carries. We will move into general. We will move into 2023 to 2024 salary and benefits proposal. This is on the agenda tonight for information only. We are presenting all of our conversations and discussion in open with respect to this matter, and so we wanted the board and the community to hear from the superintendent about what she will be proposing to us. We will be looking to have this on our agenda very likely in April, barring something,
And I'll talk about that in just a bit, Meg. So around this time each year, we begin talking about salary increases for next school year. And just to share, this topic does align with our strategic plan, specifically the recruiting, developing, and retaining quality staff. In the past, the board would negotiate base wages with employee groups. We currently do not have any certified employee groups for next school year. So this procedure is a little bit different this year, whereas all of the conversation about salary increases has to happen in open session with the full board. So I just want to be clear that it's a little bit different this year than it has been in the past. According to state statute 11822, teacher contracts have to be submitted to staff on or before May 15th, and then they need to let us know by June 15th if they are going to accept or reject that contract. So my plan is to share this information with you tonight in hopes that we could come back on April 10th and ask the board to take action on a proposal so that then we can issue those contracts hopefully before May 15th to give staff time before they leave at the end of the year to decide, are they going to accept this contract or aren't they? On this slide, take a look first, please, to the far right. This is the employee turnover trends within the last 3 years. So on the far left side of the column is the year. In the middle, it will tell you the teachers, and then in the far right is the district overall percentages. So as you can see, both the teacher employee group as well as all staff within the entire district, our numbers continually get higher. That is a concern. I'm worried about the number of staff that are leaving and either going to different districts or are leaving the profession altogether. We've had teachers even leave in the middle of the year, which we've not seen. It's not just a point trend. It's happening across the state. It's happening across the nation. But I'm concerned, and I think you as a board and as a community, we should be concerned about that. I feel that it's very, very important that we need to focus on our great staff. We've got tremendous staff in our buildings that are working incredibly hard, and I also would love for other people in other districts to come to a district that they really feel good about. If we continue to have high staff turnover, it's detrimental to students and it's detrimental to this organization. And we know that competitive salary and benefits support retention and recruitment efforts. Students and staff, the people of this organization, are our most valuable input. So I feel strongly about investing in them. The next slide, you'll see again on the far left, this time, not the right. The year down the left, what the CPI was each of those respective years, and then what salary increase we gave them, or a wage increase. So you'll see in 2018-19 it is 2.13, 2019-20 it was 2.44, 2020-21 1.81, 2021-22 1.23, 2022-23 4.7, and this year it's 8%. We did provide the CPU each of the last 5 years. What my proposal to you is that we again give the CPI, but do it a little bit different than what we have in the past. I would love to give a 7.33 total base wage increase for all staff members. Now, how that gets distributed, we can talk a little bit more about later. And then a 0.67% allocated towards a sick leave payout program upon retirement. Some may be asking, what does that mean? So, if you are 57 years of age, 20 years of WRS service, we would pay $50 per day up to 120 days. The 0.67 allocated to sick leave payout is calculated on the actual number of people that qualify for that benefit. And currently, there are 100 staff members that qualify for that payout. That doesn't mean that each of them will take that payout. They may decide to retire right now in this coming year and take that. They may decide they want to stay working with us for, you know, another year, 2, or longer. The cost to fund this proposal currently, our salary for all staff is at $51,550,006. If we give the 8%, our total increase would be a $4,124,000 increase. The portion of that that's towards wages is $3,776,137, and the actual sick leave payout at retirement, if all 100 employees took that, would be $347,863. So again, the 8% is that $4.1 million. We have to be responsible about this, and I know this is a big chunk of money, especially given what we've been talking about for the last several months, but I believe in my heart of hearts that we have to have the best staff in front of our kids if we're going to keep student achievement at the forefront. And it's gonna take dollars to do that, and we need to invest in every single one of our staff members to do that. This job is more challenging now than it ever has been. You talk to any educator in any district, anywhere, and they will tell you it continues to get harder and harder every single day. We know that teachers and staff have become increasingly mobile throughout their careers, not just at the end of the year, they're leaving throughout the year, which is hard for students when their teacher, you know, might decide to leave in the middle of the year. 83% of districts that responded to a statewide survey that was sent out by CSAS indicated that they offer a post-retirement benefit of some sort. That's one of the reasons why I feel like we need to put something in towards that sick leave payout. And that is also one thing I continually hear from staff when I do my coffee with Corey's or have informal discussions with staff. Man, it would be nice if we had something. You know, I don't use my sick days. I've accumulated them. I use them like an insurance policy. I don't use them every day. We want our staff in front of our kids, and to only utilize subs when we absolutely have to. And then we know that the support of our educators is vital to the success of our future. I once again just feel like our staff are on the front lines with these students, working so hard every single day, and I feel strongly about investing in them and really creating a destination district that we all want to be a part of and talk about frequently. With that, questions? Jen?
So I'm supportive of this. I applaud your efforts in trying to really work hard on retaining our talent, and we know like the trend and the trajectory is there are a lot of educators leaving the career altogether, and we can't have that, right? I mean, we need to keep them, and we need competitive salary. My question is twofold. One, the 57 years old for sick leave payout at retirement, like how did we arrive at that number versus like a 55?
You know, it's just what we decided to recommend. You could do the 55, but it's going to, yep. We feel like most people don't retire at 55. Most people retire at age 57 or after. So that's where we decided to stick with that 57.
Okay. And then the second question is, recognizing the cost to fund the proposal is $4.124 million. I'm sure, Dr. Owens, we are going to find efficiencies where we can potentially offset some of these costs, right?
Yes, and we believe we're likely going to get something from the state. We don't know what that's going to be yet, but we're hopeful that that will also help to fund this. You know, in the future, I am going to say this, you all know there are many, many districts that are going to referendum for operations. At some point, this district is going to have that conversation about when and if that's appropriate for us to do. But costs continue to go up, and paying people is also part of that. I mean, their costs are going up 8% for everything that they're purchasing. I feel like we need to offset that with paying them a salary that's similar.
I agree. Thank you.
Just a quick question and comment. The question is that the survey that indicated 83% of those reporting had some kind of a post-retirement benefit. Is that something that's available? Is that in a format that's available, or
It's not mine. It belongs to CISA. I could reach out to our CISA rep and ask if I could share that information.
Sure, because I'd be interested in knowing what that looked like. Is it something like we're looking at, or is it more enhanced, robust?
All over the place.
I'm sure it's across the board, but I think by looking at it in general, you might get a sense of where. I was surprised that that's that high, honestly. The second thing is that, first of all, I applaud the administration and the district business office in terms of looking at something relative to that area. Although we know, I believe there's going to be savings too involved. That is the intention. Then this is a starting point that we might be able to grow depending upon savings and budget, or is this something that you're saying this is a flat fee? This is all the direction we're headed with this?
That's a great question. So if this gets adopted, we'll be able to start gathering some of our own internal data on how many people may reduce the number of sick days that they use in a year, and hopes to bank them for a payout at the end. Because if they do that, we are not paying their salary that day and the salary of a sub. So there is going to be hopefully some cost savings, but we won't know that until we implement it. I do think that we need to look at this and continue to look at this, because the $50 per day might not be, comparable to what other districts are doing.
Good.
So we'll continue to do that.
I appreciate that, and also we also recognize that not all positions that get subs there will be savings on, but we know that the majority of our staff that would be taking sick days, there would be savings.
Correct.
And certainly, I'm very pleased that we are starting my own. This is just my personal. I don't think we're there yet, and I think after a year or two we'll have a better evidence in terms of what we might be able to do to enhance that. But I also, if possible, I'd like to see the ranges, because I think, and the rest of the board too, so that we have a better idea of what the comparables are out there as far as when we're trying to attract the highest level staff. So thank you very much for your work, and thank you for Dr. Owens and all the work his staff did as well.
I got to tell you, Tom Owens put in an incredible amount of time, costing this weeks, honestly, weeks that he put into that. So you're right, Dennis. Thank you, Tom, for all of that. Much appreciated.
So, and I'm supportive of this. One of the things that when a community member sees that increase, 4,124,000, when you think about the total amount of our budget, and I don't know the exact amount, over $100 million. So it's a percent, but what's our most valuable asset that we need to make sure we have in the district? And that's our staff. So I'm supportive of it's a need, it's an absolute need. And the numbers show it all over the state, so, thank you.
And I would reiterate what Dennis said about, if at the end of this, when everybody has their contracts settled, maybe in the summertime, if Beth would be able to present us with a comparison, so I knew where we were a couple of years ago, but after the last couple of
Regarding
years.
salary even, yeah.
Yeah, we would like to know where we stand.
Yep.
And we did, Dennis, pull some comps just in terms of neighboring districts and post-retirement benefit packages that they provided for employees. So that'll be relatively easy for us to be able to share. One additional piece that I just would like to add, Corey alluded to the fact that, you know, the work of educators is perhaps more difficult than it's ever been. And I think it's also acknowledging that it continues to become increasingly complex. The degree to which we ask educators to provide individualized and personalized instruction for students, that expectation continues to be raised. And I can go back even just in the 10 years that I've been in administration, I see that level of expectation continue to increase. So acknowledging that with compensation certainly is appropriate.
First of all, I appreciate your comment regarding the work that we now ask of teachers. But I think it's so totally different even from 10, 12 years ago in terms of the feedback that teachers get from the community and families, not always positive. The low regard education has had in our state over the last 12 years by a large section of the population, the accountability that's required, the differences in scholars in terms of who's coming to us and the families that need. So I think it's a much, much tougher job, which is why sometimes we have people here on Friday and on Monday they're not showing up anymore, that is a new phenomenon, but it's also saying that, you know, people can walk and they can go a lot of places and have equal compensation. Fortunately, we have people that we should be paying our teachers, obviously, for the work they do, but I also know that teachers love what they do, too, so that helps. This in terms of the comparables, though, I think I did get some feedback on the comparables, and I think it's from a couple years ago, so I'd like to have that updated, our local comparables, and also include, even though they're smaller districts, I think we have to include Almonds and Amherst, because there was a time where we never got staff going from Stevens Point to Amherst, but when I was superintendent there, we drew staff from Amherst to Amherst because of the fact that at that time the compensation and benefits was not comparable, which I know the district made some strides in that area, but I think those other comparables are important, not just the Rapids, Wausau, DC, Everest, et cetera.
And I think that was one of the things that we want to be sure we confirm in doing that sort of high-level analysis, was whether or not the data that we collected was still current and valid.
Yeah, no, I think things have changed. We know that, for example, Almond gave up part of it, but they still retained the $1,500. So over 25 years, that's still $45,000. So that's still significant, 3 years of insurance. So anyway, thank you for that, and I appreciate getting the update on it then.
Thanks.
Barb did text in a question.
yes.
I got the question here because
Okay.
she's been coughing a lot. So, for example, when we look at sick leave payout at retirement, 20 years, she's saying EAs don't work the same as, they don't work a full year or same as a teacher. So if somebody is part-time or 3/4 time, how does that equate to 20 years of service?
So that would be prorated.
Oh,
Okay.
good
Yep,
question.
that's
Yeah,
a
good.
really good question.
So I'm going to note, we have tried our best over the last number of years to provide CPI. As Corey noted in her report, it's been pretty low. I mean, below 2% for a good part of the time, even below 1%, even prior to that. 8% is a big number. And we are at a $4.6 million, $4.2 million structural deficit right now, which we're hoping will come in lower. This will be in addition to that. This is the result, in large part, of a state legislature that has provided a 0% per pupil increase to us over 2 years. And we are not the only district that is dealing with this. Districts around the state are all dealing with the reality that CPI was 4.6% last year and is 8% this year. And we have a significant shortage of in an employee pool. And it's essential, as Corey pointed out that we need to recruit, attract, and retain. I am also hopeful that we will see some funding from the state legislature. We will not know that till June or July, meaning that this decision is a decision that this board will be making blind with respect to what, if anything, we will be receiving from the state. We have not, there has not been any commitment made. The governor has laid out what he would like. The legislature has indicated that they don't agree with his analysis of the funds that are available at the state level to fund issues like our K through 12 schools in Wisconsin. I do believe that we will need to go to referendum. We've been talking about it for a while. We went to referendum back now, it's hard to believe, it was 2018, which 5 years. I can't believe it's been 5 years. You know, we've just completed our buildings. But in the 5 years that we haven't gone to referendum, a lot of districts around us and throughout the state have. In fact, 190 of them did this past year.
For operational?
For the vast majority operational, and the vast majority passed. They did. But I think it's really important that we need to, I do believe that regardless of what, if anything, the state chooses to provide to us, we need to recognize that the state of Wisconsin is truly requiring local K through 12 public districts, school districts, to fund education through local referendum. And we all know that a referendum is not going to happen overnight. It takes time to build out the information, including comparables like you're asking for, Dennis. And then it takes quite some time to be able to get out into the community and provide them with the facts and the information with respect to what it is that that the district is putting on referendum and what those dollars will go towards. So, you know, along with comparables, I believe it's very important that we as a district, our board, come to some decision in the not too distant future about when it is that we are going to be looking to go to referendum so that we can allow administration working with us to be able to bring forward in a timely way what is already a fiscal cliff that we are seeing in our district. I'm supportive of what is being proposed, you know, but I believe to be able to make that decision in good conscience, I also, as an individual board member, have to make the commitment that we are going to, as a board, find the financial resources to be able to support and sustain what it is that we are promising to our staff by a decision such as this. Because it's, I mean, we're going to see the same thing next year, or relatively close to it, in light of what is happening with our economy. And so I think we really need to, as we're making the commitment to provide the resources, we as a board need to make that commitment to find, to grow the pool of resources that we have available to fund our local public schools. Because right now, that's what the state's making us do.
Sounds like a future agenda item then.
It does.
And retreat topic, maybe.
Yep. All right, any other discussion or questions? And again, this was on just for information. The plan is that it will be at our April meeting.
No, just a comment. I think that it's a strong move by our administration and hopefully by our board in terms of supporting this. But it also sends a message, because right now we know that the other districts in our area, not all of them have reported, not all of them may be at that level. However, as you indicate, Meg, it's taking a little bit of a risk, but what we're saying to our staff is, this is an example, we're taking a risk on them, and I don't think that any district does that enough. And the fact that we are taking the risk for them, I think sends a message to how important you value our workforce, and it would be a message from our board and our community of how much they really truly do value, because it's one thing saying, oh, you know, we really like you, you do hard work, but it's another thing saying we want to be able to compensate you at a level which we feel is robust and competitive, and we haven't always been able to do that. And our staff over the years now have had mixed messages from the board administration. I think this is a strong positive message, and they're deserving of it, and I hope the community is supportive. I hope our board is supportive of that as well, and thank you for your support.
Any other comments? All right, we will move into our future meeting dates and times. Just a reminder that we will be having 2 meetings, April 10th and April 24th. We will probably be looking for a consensus start time for the 24th at our meeting on the 10th. So just be sure you bring your calendars and everybody knows what will be the earliest. We might all be able to get together for the appointment of our new board member, which will happen prior to our organizational meeting. We do have a closed session item. We need to move into closed session under Wisconsin Statutes 19.85, paren 1, paren C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically to consider preliminary teacher non-renewals. Could I have a motion to go into closed session, please?
Second.
Motion by Dennis, second by Jen. Any discussion on the motion? Carlin will call the roll.
Mr. Robbie?
Yes.
Mr. Pope?
Yes.
Ms. Bushman?
Yes.
Mr. Ebel?
Yes.
Ms. Portson?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Ms. Erler?
Yes.
And motion carries.